Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another absolute storm of a story for you today, and as always, we're keeping things calm with some peaceful Minecraft in the background while we unpack the chaos. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into this mess together. Before we dive in, I just want to take a second to appreciate you all. When you comment, interact, or just show up, it reminds me why I love doing this. It's easy to forget there are real people watching, but your support makes it feel real, and I'm genuinely grateful. So, our narrator was just trying to do the right thing. Be the responsible one, the designated driver for a night out with friends. Simple enough, right? Except when your best friend makes a catastrophic mistake and the entire group decides you're expendable. Doing the right thing becomes a lot more complicated. Let's get into it. I was the designated driver, which sounds responsible until you realize it made me a witness to something I can never unsee. My best friend Jake hit a pedestrian, and in the chaos that followed, in those few seconds of pure panic, everyone made a choice that would haunt us all. We'd been out celebrating Jake's promotion. Nothing crazy, just drinks at our usual spot downtown. I was completely sober, had been nursing water all night because I'd volunteered to drive. Around midnight, we decided to call it and piled into my car. Jake was in the passenger seat, his girlfriend Sarah in the back with two other friends from our group, Matt and Chris. Everyone was buzzed, laughing, having a good time. The kind of night you're supposed to remember fondly. I was taking the back roads home because there was construction on the main highway. It was dark, barely any streetlights on that stretch. Jake was messing with the radio, trying to find a station, when suddenly there was this horrible thud. Not loud enough to be a deer, but definitely something. I slammed on the brakes and my heart just stopped. Through the rearview mirror, I could see a figure lying in the road, maybe 20 feet behind us. I threw the car in park and started to get out. That's when Jake grabbed my arm. He was pale, shaking, and he said, "We need to go. We need to leave right now." I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. There was a person back there, a human being lying in the road. But before I could even process what he was saying, Sarah was leaning forward from the back seat, her voice sharp and urgent, telling me Jake was right. We had to go. We had to leave now before anyone saw us. Matt and Chris were freaking out in the back. Chris was actually crying. I said, "No, absolutely not. I'm calling 911." But Jake physically took my phone out of my hand. He said the person was probably fine, probably just stunned, and if we stayed, we'd all go to jail. He kept saying it over and over. We'd all go to jail. Our lives would be ruined. Sarah backed him up, said we were all in the car. We'd all be accessories. We'd all be charged. I should have fought harder. I should have screamed, should have grabbed my phone back, should have done literally anything else. But I was terrified and confused, and 5 people were yelling at me in a dark car on an empty road. So I drove. I drove away from that scene, and I've regretted it every single second since. The ride home was silent except for Sarah telling everyone to delete any texts or photos from that night, to get their stories straight, to say we'd gone home early and been at Jake's apartment watching movies. She was weirdly calm about it, like she'd done this before. Jake stared straight ahead the whole time, wouldn't look at me. When I dropped everyone off, Sarah grabbed my shoulder and said, "Don't do anything stupid. We're all in this together now." I didn't sleep that night, or the next night. I kept checking the news, searching for any mention of an accident on that road. Nothing for 2 days. I started to let myself believe maybe it really was nothing. Maybe the person had been fine. Maybe they'd gotten up and walked away. Then came the breaking point. 3 days later, the story broke. Local news, front page. A pedestrian had been found dead on that back road. Hit and run. They were still looking for the vehicle. The victim was a 62-year-old man who'd been walking home from his night shift at a warehouse. He had a wife, 3 kids, grandchildren, and he died alone on a dark road while we drove away. I threw up. I actually threw up reading that article. This wasn't some abstract mistake anymore. This was a real person with a real family who would never see him again because we'd left him there. Because I'd left him there. I called Jake immediately, told him we had to come forward. We could do it anonymously, we could get a lawyer, but we had to do something. He told me to calm down, said there was no proof it was us, said coming forward now would only destroy all our lives for no reason. The man was already dead. Turning ourselves in wouldn't bring him back. I said I didn't care, I couldn't live with this. That's when Sarah got on the phone. Her voice was ice cold. She said if I went to the police, they would all say I was the one driving, that I'd been drinking, that they'd tried to get me to stop but I wouldn't listen. She said they'd already created the evidence to back it up. I thought she was bluffing. I really did. 2 days later, Jake sent me a screenshot. Text messages, supposedly from my number, sent the night of the accident. Messages about how drunk I was, how I shouldn't be driving, how I was going too fast. Except I never sent those messages. I checked my phone, checked my records. Nothing. They were fake, completely fabricated, but they looked real. Timestamps, my contact name, everything. Then Sarah posted an old photo on her private Instagram, dated the night of the accident, showing an empty bottle of vodka with the caption, "Some people don't know their limits." She tagged me. Comments from Matt and Chris agreeing, saying they'd been worried about me that night, building a narrative piece by piece that I was the reckless drunk driver and they were the concerned friends. This is where patience finally snapped. I realized they weren't just covering their tracks. They were actively building a case against me. If this ever came to light, if the police ever connected us to that scene, I would take the fall. Not Jake who was driving, not Sarah who orchestrated the cover-up. Me. The one person who'd actually wanted to do the right thing. I stopped sleeping entirely. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the road. I started having panic attacks. My hands would shake randomly throughout the day. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work. My entire world had narrowed down to this one terrible secret, and the knowledge that my so-called friends had turned me into their scapegoat. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew I needed proof. Real proof. Not just my word against theirs. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I bought a small recording device online, one of those pens with a hidden microphone, and I asked to meet Jake at his apartment to talk things through one more time. He agreed, probably thinking he could intimidate me into silence again. Sarah was there too, which actually worked in my favor. I had that pen in my shirt pocket, recording everything, as I sat on their couch and laid it all out. I said I couldn't do this anymore, that we needed to come forward, that this was eating me alive. Sarah laughed, actually laughed. She said I was being dramatic, that I needed to grow up and accept that sometimes bad things happen and you just move on. Jake was quieter, but he backed her up, said they'd all agreed to protect each other and I was breaking that agreement. I asked what about the fake texts, the fabricated evidence. Sarah didn't even try to deny it. She said that was insurance, protection. She said if I couldn't be trusted to keep quiet, then yeah, they needed to make sure I went down instead of them. She was so casual about it, like she was discussing the weather, like she hadn't just admitted to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. I had everything I needed. The next morning, I took the recording to a lawyer, a real one, criminal defense, someone who dealt with cases like this. I played him the entire conversation. He sat there quietly, listening to my friends casually discuss framing me for vehicular manslaughter, and when it finished, he just looked at me and said, "You need to go to the police right now, and I'm coming with you." We went that afternoon. I brought the recording, my phone record showing I never sent those texts, everything. I told them exactly what happened, that Jake had been driving, that he'd hit someone, that we'd all left the scene but I'd wanted to call for help, that they'd threatened me and built fake evidence to frame me if I talked. The detective listened to everything, took notes, asked clarifying questions. He was professional, but I could see the disgust in his eyes when he heard the recording of Sarah laughing about their insurance policy. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Within 48 hours, 3 of them were arrested. Jake for vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene. Sarah for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Matt for obstruction. Chris got a lesser charge for cooperating. Turned out he'd been keeping his own records. I was the designated driver, which sounds responsible until you realize it made me a witness to something I can never unsee. My best friend Jake hit a pedestrian, and in the chaos that followed, in those few seconds of pure panic, everyone made a choice that would haunt us all. We'd been out celebrating Jake's promotion. Nothing crazy, just drinks at our usual spot downtown. I was completely sober, had been nursing water all night because I'd volunteered to drive. Around midnight, we decided to call it and piled into my car. Jake was in the passenger seat, his girlfriend Sarah in the back with 2 other friends from our group, Matt and Chris. Everyone was buzzed, laughing, having a good time. The kind of night you're supposed to remember fondly. I was taking the back roads home because there was construction on the main highway. It was dark, barely any streetlights on that stretch. Jake was messing with the radio, trying to find a station, when suddenly there was this horrible thud. Not loud enough to be a deer, but definitely something. I slammed on the brakes and my heart just stopped. Through the rearview mirror, I could see a figure lying in the road, maybe 20 feet behind us. I threw the car in park and started to get out. That's when Jake grabbed my arm. He was pale, shaking, and he said, "We need to go. We need to leave right now." I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. There was a person back there, a human being lying in the road. But before I could even process what he was saying, Sarah was leaning forward from the back seat, her voice sharp and urgent, telling me Jake was right. We had to go. We had to leave now before anyone saw us. Matt and Chris were freaking out in the back. Chris was actually crying. I said, "No, absolutely not. I'm calling 911. But Jake physically took my phone out of my hand. He said the person was probably fine, probably just stunned, and if we stayed, we'd all go to jail. He kept saying it over and over. We'd all go to jail. Our lives would be ruined. Sarah backed him up, said we were all in the car. We'd all be accessories. We'd all be charged. I should have fought harder. I should have screamed, should have grabbed my phone back, should have done literally anything else. But I was terrified and confused, and 5 people were yelling at me in a dark car on an empty road. So I drove. I drove away from that scene, and I've regretted it every single second since. The ride home was silent except for Sarah telling everyone to delete any texts or photos from that night, to get their stories straight, to say we'd gone home early and been at Jake's apartment watching movies. She was weirdly calm about it, like she'd done this before. Jake stared straight ahead the whole time, wouldn't look at me. When I dropped everyone off, Sarah grabbed my shoulder and said, "Don't do anything stupid. We're all in this together now." I didn't sleep that night, or the next night. I kept checking the news, searching for any mention of an accident on that road. Nothing for 2 days. I started to let myself believe maybe it really was nothing. Maybe the person had been fine. Maybe they'd gotten up and walked away. Then came the breaking point. 3 days later, the story broke. Local news, front page. A pedestrian had been found dead on that back road. Hit and run. They were still looking for the vehicle. The victim was a 62-year-old man who'd been walking home from his night shift at a warehouse. He had a wife, 3 kids, grandchildren, and he died alone on a dark road while we drove away. I threw up. I actually threw up reading that article. This wasn't some abstract mistake anymore. This was a real person with a real family who would never see him again because we'd left him there. Because I'd left him there. I called Jake immediately, told him we had to come forward. We could do it anonymously, we could get a lawyer, but we had to do something. He told me to calm down, said there was no proof it was us, said coming forward now would only destroy all our lives for no reason. The man was already dead. Turning ourselves in wouldn't bring him back. I said I didn't care, I couldn't live with this. That's when Sarah got on the phone. Her voice was ice cold. She said if I went to the police, they would all say I was the one driving, that I'd been drinking, that they'd tried to get me to stop but I wouldn't listen. She said they'd already created the evidence to back it up. I thought she was bluffing. I really did. 2 days later, Jake sent me a screenshot. Text messages, supposedly from my number, sent the night of the accident. Messages about how drunk I was, how I shouldn't be driving, how I was going too fast. Except I never sent those messages. I checked my phone, checked my records. Nothing. They were fake, completely fabricated, but they looked real. Timestamps, my contact name, everything. Then Sarah posted an old photo on her private Instagram, dated the night of the accident, showing an empty bottle of vodka with the caption, "Some people don't know their limits." She tagged me. Comments from Matt and Chris agreeing, saying they'd been worried about me that night, building a narrative piece by piece that I was the reckless drunk driver and they were the concerned friends. This is where patience finally snapped. I realized they weren't just covering their tracks. They were actively building a case against me. If this ever came to light, if the police ever connected us to that scene, I would take the fall. Not Jake who was driving, not Sarah who orchestrated the cover-up. Me. The one person who'd actually wanted to do the right thing. I stopped sleeping entirely. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the road. I started having panic attacks. My hands would shake randomly throughout the day. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work. My entire world had narrowed down to this one terrible secret, and the knowledge that my so-called friends had turned me into their scapegoat. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew I needed proof. Real proof. Not just my word against theirs. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I bought a small recording device online, one of those pens with a hidden microphone, and I asked to meet Jake at his apartment to talk things through one more time. He agreed, probably thinking he could intimidate me into silence again. Sarah was there too, which actually worked in my favor. I had that pen in my shirt pocket, recording everything, as I sat on their couch and laid it all out. I said I couldn't do this anymore, that we needed to come forward, that this was eating me alive. Sarah laughed, actually laughed. She said I was being dramatic, that I needed to grow up and accept that sometimes bad things happen and you just move on. Jake was quieter, but he backed her up, said they'd all agreed to protect each other and I was breaking that agreement. I asked what about the fake texts, the fabricated evidence. Sarah didn't even try to deny it. She said that was insurance, protection. She said if I couldn't be trusted to keep quiet, then yeah, they needed to make sure I went down instead of them. She was so casual about it, like she was discussing the weather, like she hadn't just admitted to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. I had everything I needed. The next morning, I took the recording to a lawyer, a real one, criminal defense, someone who dealt with cases like this. I played him the entire conversation. He sat there quietly, listening to my friends casually discuss framing me for vehicular manslaughter. And when it finished, he just looked at me and said, "You need to go to the police right now, and I'm coming with you." We went that afternoon. I brought the recording, my phone record showing I never sent those texts, everything. I told them exactly what happened, that Jake had been driving, that he'd hit someone, that we'd all left the scene but I'd wanted to call for help, that they'd threatened me and built fake evidence to frame me if I talked. The detective listened to everything, took notes, asked clarifying questions. He was professional, but I could see the disgust in his eyes when he heard the recording of Sarah laughing about their insurance policy. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Within 48 hours, 3 of them were arrested. Jake for vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene. Sarah for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Matt for obstruction. Chris got a lesser charge for cooperating. Turned out he'd been keeping his own records, his own proof, because he'd been just as scared as me, but too afraid to come forward alone. The news coverage was brutal. Our entire friend group, once tight-knit and inseparable, was now the subject of a criminal investigation. People we'd known for years stopped talking to us. Social media tore us apart. Jake's family tried to paint me as a traitor who destroyed their son's life over an accident. Sarah's parents hired an expensive lawyer who tried to claim the recording was illegally obtained, which it wasn't. The trial took months. I had to testify. Had to sit in a courtroom and describe in detail how I'd watched my best friend hit someone and then been bullied into silence. How they'd manufactured evidence against me. How I'd lived in terror for weeks thinking I'd either go to prison for something I didn't do or carry this secret forever. Jake pled guilty eventually, got 7 years. Sarah fought it, but the recording was damning. She got 3 years for obstruction, Matt got probation, Chris got community service and a suspended sentence for cooperating. Our friend group doesn't exist anymore, obviously. Some people sided with Jake, said I'd betrayed him, that friends don't turn on each other. Others understood why I did it. Most just wanted distance from the whole mess. I lost my entire social circle in one move. But here's what nobody tells you about doing the right thing. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like justice or vindication or relief. It feels lonely. It feels like you traded one nightmare for a different nightmare. Because now I'm the person who sent his friends to prison. I'm the snitch, the traitor, the one who couldn't keep his mouth shut. Except when I close my eyes now, I don't just see that figure in the road anymore. I also see his wife at the trial, crying as she listened to what happened to her husband. I see his daughter hugging me in the courthouse hallway, thanking me for finally giving them answers. For finally letting them have some kind of closure after months of not knowing who took their father from them. That's what makes it worth it. Not the justice system working or my friends facing consequences, but knowing that family finally got the truth, that the man who died on that road wasn't just forgotten, wasn't just another unsolved hit and run statistic. His death meant something because someone finally cared enough to speak up. I still have nightmares, still have panic attacks sometimes. I'm in therapy now, working through the guilt and trauma and complicated mess of emotions that comes with watching your entire life implode because you chose honesty over loyalty. Some days are harder than others, but I can sleep now. Not great, not peacefully, but I can sleep. And that's something I couldn't do when I was carrying their secret. Would I do it again? Yeah, I would. Even knowing what it cost me, because the alternative was letting them turn me into their fool guy, while a family never got answers about what happened to someone they loved. And I couldn't live with that. Betrayal from friends is one thing, but what happens when family turns against you to hide their own dirty secrets? This next story hits even closer to home. My brother Marcus and I were close. Like, genuinely close. Growing up, we had each other's backs through everything. Family vacations, late night talks about life, being each other's best man at our weddings. He was the first person I'd call when something good happened. So when my wife Sarah sat me down one evening with tears streaming down her face and told me she knew I was having an affair, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I wasn't having an affair. I'd never even thought about it. I loved Sarah. We'd been married for 6 years, and sure, things weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or at least I thought we were. She pulled out a folder, her hands shaking, and spread the contents across our kitchen table. Hotel receipts from cities I'd never been to. Screenshots of text messages that looked like they came from my number, arranging meetups with someone named Elena. Romantic, intimate messages that made my stomach turn because I'd never written a single one of them. I tried to explain. I begged her to believe me. But how do you defend yourself against evidence that looks that real? She wouldn't even look at me. She just kept saying the same thing over and over. Marcus showed me everything. Your own brother wouldn't lie about this. Marcus. My brother had brought her this evidence. He'd sat her down, played the concerned family member, and fed her this entire narrative about my supposed affair. And she believed him because why wouldn't she? He was family. He had no reason to lie. I felt sick, confused, betrayed in a way I couldn't even process yet. I called Marcus immediately, and he answered on the second ring, voice casual like nothing was wrong. When I confronted him, asked him why he'd tell Sarah I was cheating, he actually laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine, dismissive laugh. He said Sarah was paranoid anyway, that she'd probably misunderstood what he'd said, and that I should just smooth things over with her instead of dragging him into our marital problems. That's when the confusion started turning into something else, something cold and sharp, because Marcus wasn't defensive, he wasn't apologetic, he was deflecting, and people only deflect that hard when they're hiding something. I started looking at those hotel receipts more carefully, the dates, the locations, the credit card numbers partially visible at the bottom. Something about them felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then I remembered. Marcus had taken a business trip to Atlanta 3 months ago. One of the receipts was from an Atlanta hotel on those exact dates. Another receipt matched a conference he'd mentioned attending in Denver. These weren't my receipts, they were his. He'd taken his own evidence of hotel stays and somehow made them look like they came from me. The text messages were harder to explain, but there are apps for that. Spoofing numbers, creating fake message threads. It would have taken him maybe an hour to set up. But why? Why would my own brother frame me for an affair I wasn't having? That's where it gets absurd. The only reason someone frames you for cheating is if they're trying to cover up their own cheating. Marcus was projecting. He was having an affair, and he decided the best way to keep suspicion off himself was to throw me under the bus. I hired a private investigator. Cost me $2,000 I didn't really have, but I needed to know. I gave him Marcus's schedule, his usual haunts, the name Elena from those fake text messages. Within a week, the investigator came back with a file that made everything make sense in the worst possible way. Marcus was having an affair with his assistant, Elena. They'd been seeing each other for over a year, and Elena wasn't just his mistress. She was 7 months pregnant, with his child. I sat in my car reading the investigator's report, looking at surveillance photos of Marcus and Elena together, her belly visible in every recent shot, and I felt something break inside me. Not just anger, something colder. My brother had tried to destroy my marriage to protect his affair. He'd weaponized our family bond, manipulated my wife, and framed me for something he was actually doing. And his own wife, my sister-in-law Jennifer, had no idea any of this was happening. Jennifer was good people. She'd been part of our family for 8 years. She and Sarah were close. She deserved to know. They both did. But I didn't want to just tell them. Words can be denied, twisted, excused. I needed something undeniable. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering everything. The PI gave me copies of all his surveillance photos. I got bank statements showing Marcus's Venmo payments to Elena, dozens of them, labeled things like "Our Future" and "For the Baby" and "Love You." I found hotel receipts, real ones this time, showing rooms booked under both their names. I even got copies of text messages between them that the PI had pulled from Elena's phone records, where Marcus explicitly talked about keeping Jennifer in the dark and how framing me had bought them time. Then came the breaking point. I invited both families to Sunday dinner at my house, told everyone I wanted to clear the air, that Sarah and I had worked through some things and I wanted us all together to move forward. Marcus agreed immediately, probably thought he'd won. Jennifer was excited. Sarah was cautiously hopeful. Perfect. I set up a projector in our dining room, told everyone I'd put together a little slideshow about family memories. We ate dinner, made small talk. Marcus was relaxed, confident, cracking jokes like he always did. And then I dimmed the lights and started the slideshow. The first image was an ultrasound photo. Elena's name was clearly visible at the top, along with the date and the words 28 weeks. Jennifer's fork clattered onto her plate. Sarah looked confused. Marcus went completely still. I didn't say anything. I just let the next image appear. Another ultrasound. Then a photo of Marcus and Elena together, his hand on her pregnant belly. Then screenshots of their text messages, the Venmo payments, love letters, everything. Jennifer stood up so fast her chair fell backwards. She wasn't crying yet. She was just staring at the screen, her face completely white. Sarah looked from the projector to me to Marcus, finally understanding. Marcus tried to speak, started to say something about how this wasn't what it looked like, but Jennifer cut him off. Her voice was quiet and sharp. Get out of this house. You almost have to admire the audacity. He actually tried to explain, tried to say it was complicated, that he'd made mistakes, but he still loved her. Jennifer told him if he didn't leave in the next 30 seconds, she was calling the police. He left. Elena wasn't at the dinner, obviously, but I'd sent her a copy of everything too. Wanted her to know that her secret was out, and her relationship with Marcus had cost him everything. Jennifer filed for divorce that week, took the kids, took the house, took everything she legally could. Sarah apologized to me about 100 times. She'd believed Marcus because she trusted him, and he'd exploited that trust to hurt both of us. It took time, but we worked through it. We're solid now, stronger than before actually, because we survived something that should have destroyed us. Marcus hasn't spoken to me since that dinner. Not a single word. His wife took him for everything in the divorce. His relationship with Elena fell apart a month later when she realized he had nothing left to offer her. Last I heard, he's paying child support and living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. He tried to reach out to our parents, paint himself as the victim, but I'd already shown them everything. They were disgusted. Good riddance, honestly. Some people think I went too far, that I should have just told Jennifer privately, worked it out like adults. But Marcus didn't give me or Sarah that courtesy. He tried to nuke my marriage to save his own skin. He weaponized our family against me. So, yeah, I made sure everyone knew exactly who he really was. I made sure there was no way for him to spin the narrative, no way to play victim, no room for excuses. Family secrets have a way of exploding when you least expect it. But sometimes the deception runs even deeper, like when your own mother has been living a double life. I thought my marriage was solid, like genuinely solid. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 4. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our Friday night takeout ritual. Sure, things had gotten a bit comfortable, maybe even predictable, but I thought that was just what happens when you settle into life with someone. I thought we were happy. Then my coworker Jennifer ruined everything over lunch on a random Tuesday. We were sitting in the break room, scrolling through our phones while eating sad desk salads, when she suddenly went quiet. That weird kind of quiet where you know something's wrong. She looked at me, then back at her phone, then at me again. Finally, she said, "I need to show you something, but I don't want to unless you're sure you want to see it." Obviously, I said yes. Obviously, I regretted it immediately. She turned her phone around, and there he was. My husband. Same face, same smile, same photos I'd seen him take in our living room. But the name was different. Devon. The profile said entrepreneur, newly single, looking for something real. The bio was charming and witty, talking about his love of hiking and craft beer and traveling to new places. All things my husband claimed to hate. I just stared at it. Jennifer was talking, but I couldn't hear her. My brain was trying to process how the man I shared a bed with every night, the man whose laundry I folded and whose coffee I made every morning, could have an active dating profile calling himself newly single. Jennifer said she'd only swiped right as a joke to see if it was really him, and when it matched, she'd panicked and showed me immediately. I thanked her, told her I was fine, and spent the rest of the workday in a bathroom stall trying not to scream. When I got home that night, I acted normal, made dinner, asked about his day, watched him lie to my face about a meeting that ran long. He was so casual about it, so comfortable. That's when I realized this wasn't new. This was practiced. I waited until he fell asleep. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through his phone. I know, invasion of privacy, toxic behavior, all of that. But you know what's more toxic? Having a secret dating profile while you're married. His phone was locked, but I knew his passcode. He'd never bothered changing it because he never thought he needed to. I found the Bumble app hidden in a folder labeled Work Apps. Clever. When I opened it, my stomach dropped even further. He wasn't just talking to one person. He had active conversations with multiple women, flirty messages, plans to meet up, photos I'd never seen. And here's where it gets absurd. He'd told several of them he was going through a difficult divorce, that he was separated but still living in the house temporarily, that he was looking for someone who understood what it was like to start over. The audacity was genuinely impressive in the worst possible way. I took screenshots of everything, saved them to a cloud drive he didn't have access to. Then I put his phone back exactly where I found it and lay awake the rest of the night planning my next move. The next day, I created my own fake Bumble profile, used photos from a stock image site, made up a name, kept the bio vague and interesting. Then I started swiping. It took maybe 20 minutes before I found him. Devon the entrepreneur, newly single, looking for something real. I swiped right. We matched instantly. He messaged within 5 minutes, something generic and flirty about how my smile caught his eye. I played along, kept my responses light and interested. Within an hour, he was suggesting we meet for drinks that weekend. Saturday night. The same Saturday he'd told me that morning he had to go to a work conference in the city and wouldn't be home until Sunday. I told Devon I'd love to meet Saturday night. He sent back a winky face emoji. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started digging deeper, looking for anything else he might be hiding. I checked our bank statements and noticed regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Small amounts, a few hundred here and there, but consistent. When I called the bank pretending to verify the account, they confirmed it was under his name only, a separate account I'd never known existed. I went through his car while he was at work, found a second phone in the glove compartment, cheap burner-style thing, but it was charged and active. The message history made me physically ill. He wasn't just casually dating, he was maintaining full relationships with at least 3 different women, telling each of them he was separated and living alone, making plans with them, sending them good morning texts while he was lying next to me. One woman thought they were exclusive, another was planning a weekend trip with him next month. The third had apparently already met him several times and was texting about how she couldn't wait until his divorce was final, so they could be together publicly. There was also a P.O. box receipt in the center console. I looked up the address and drove there on my lunch break. Paid the fee to access it with his name and the key I'd found. Inside were credit card statements for cards I didn't know about, receipts from restaurants and hotels, even a lease agreement for a small apartment across town that he'd apparently been renting for the past 8 months. He had a whole separate life, like a completely separate existence that I'd been completely oblivious to, and I'd been worried about our marriage getting too comfortable. This is where patience finally snapped. I could have confronted him privately, could have packed his bags and changed the locks, could have filed for divorce quietly and moved on. But something about the sheer scale of his deception, the calculated way he'd built this double life, made me want him to face all of it at once. So I did something petty and beautiful and absolutely nuclear. I texted all three women from my real phone, introduced myself as his wife, explained that we were very much still married, very much still living together, and very much not getting divorced. I included photos of us together, screenshots of our joint accounts, pictures of our house with both our names on the mortgage. Two of them blocked me immediately. The third, the one who thought they were exclusive, called me. We talked for over an hour, compared notes, realized he'd been using the same lines on both of us, the same stories, even the same pet names. She was devastated. So was I. We were both victims of the same con artist who happened to have a legal marriage certificate with me. That's when I had an idea. I told her I was planning something for Saturday night and asked if she wanted in. She said absolutely. Then I contacted the other two women, left voicemails explaining I wasn't angry at them, that they'd been lied to, but if they wanted closure and answers, I was hosting a little gathering Saturday evening, and they were welcome to attend. One didn't respond, the other said she'd be there. Saturday arrived. I'd told my husband that morning I had plans with Jennifer and would be out all evening. He seemed thrilled, probably because it meant he could freely get ready for his date with fake me. He showered, put on cologne, wore the shirt I'd bought him for our anniversary. The irony was almost funny. I cancelled on Devon last minute. Said something came up. He was disappointed but said no problem, maybe next weekend. Sure, Devon. Maybe never. Then I ordered food, set up the living room like I was hosting a party, and waited. I'd told the two women who agreed to come to arrive around 7. I'd told my husband I'd be home around 9, giving him plenty of time to think he was safe. The first woman arrived at 7 on the dot. I'd shown her photos so she knew who I was. She was shaking when I opened the door, clearly nervous but determined. I offered her wine. We sat in awkward silence. The second woman showed up 20 minutes later. When she walked in and saw the other woman, her face went pale. I introduced them, explained we were all here for the same reason. They stared at each other, then at me, processing the surreal nightmare they'd walked into. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. My husband came home early. He wasn't supposed to be back until late, but apparently his plans had changed. He walked through the front door at 7:45, saw 3 women sitting in his living room, and literally froze mid-step. The silence was deafening. You could see his brain trying to process what was happening, trying to find an explanation that made sense. One of the women stood up and said, "Are you kidding me right now?" The other just started crying. He looked at me, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally managed to say, "What is this?" I smiled, told him it was a surprise party, said I'd invited some friends of his to celebrate, asked if he wanted to introduce everyone properly since I'd only met them today. He tried. He actually tried to spin it. Said these were clients, said there was a misunderstanding, said I was being crazy and embarrassing. But his voice was shaking and his face was red, and everyone in that room knew exactly what this was. One of the women called him a liar to his face, told him she'd seen the texts, knew about the fake divorce story, knew everything. The other demanded to know how many of them there were. Was it just us 3? Were there others? He didn't answer, just stood there like a deer in headlights, watching his entire constructed reality collapse in real time. I told him to get out. He said this was his house too. I said, "Fine, then I'll get out, and so will your guests, and we can let the lawyers figure out who gets what." But right now I needed him to leave before I started throwing things. He left, actually just turned around and walked out the door without another word. Didn't even take his keys. The 3 of us sat there for another hour, talked, cried, laughed at the absurdity of it. Bonded over the shared experience of being conned by the same mediocre man, exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch. I filed for divorce the following Monday. My lawyer was almost gleeful when I showed him the evidence. The separate bank account, the secret apartment, the dating profiles, all of it. My husband tried to fight for half of everything, but his lawyer took one look at the documentation and advised him to settle. I kept the house, kept most of our shared assets. He got his secret apartment and his burner phone and whatever was left of his reputation. The 2 women I'd met both cut contact with him immediately. The third one I never heard from again. I hope she moved on too. It's been 8 months now. I'm still in the house, redecorated everything, made it actually mine. Started therapy to process the betrayal and figure out how I missed the signs for so long. Went on a few dates, but nothing serious yet. Honestly, I'm okay with that. People ask if I regret the dramatic confrontation, if I wish I'd handled it more privately. And sure, maybe it was petty, maybe it was messy, but watching him stand in that living room, unable to lie his way out, unable to manipulate or gaslight or spin the narrative, that was worth everything. He built a double life and I burned it down in one evening. Sometimes that's just how it goes. Speaking of people living double lives, wait until you hear what one person discovered after a simple DNA test turned their entire family tree upside down. I ordered a 23andMe kit on a whim during one of those Black Friday sales. Nothing deep, just curiosity about our family tree. My mom always talked about our Irish and German roots, said we had some distant relatives who came through Ellis Island, the usual family lore everyone has. I figured it'd be fun to see the percentages, maybe connect with some distant cousins, get one of those cool ancestry breakdowns to share at Thanksgiving. The kit arrived about 6 weeks after I sent it in. I got the email notification that my results were ready, but I was at work, so I figured I'd check them that evening. When I got home, I found the package sitting on the kitchen counter, already opened. The envelope was torn, the report pulled out and sitting there like someone had been reading through it. My sister Hannah was in the living room, and the second I walked in with the papers, her face went completely white, like all the blood just drained out. I asked her why she'd opened my mail, and she stammered something about thinking it was hers, which made no sense because she hadn't ordered a DNA test. Her hands were actually shaking. I'd never seen her like that. I brushed it off as weird but didn't think much of it until I logged into my account that night to see the full results online. That's when things got strange. The ancestry breakdown was interesting. Showed about 40% Irish and 30% German like we expected. Some British, a little Scandinavian. Normal stuff. But then I clicked on the DNA relatives section. There were the usual distant cousins, people sharing like 2% DNA, probably fourth or fifth cousins I'd never meet. But near the top was a match labeled as a close family member, half-sibling, sharing 25% DNA. A woman named Rebecca, living in Oregon. I stared at that screen for a solid 10 minutes trying to make it make sense. My parents had been married 30 years. No divorces, no previous relationships that I knew of. My dad wasn't the type to have secret families. I would have heard about a half-sister, right? This had to be a mistake. Some glitch in the system. I screenshotted it and sent it to Hannah asking if she'd seen anything weird in the results. She called me immediately, asked me not to tell anyone, said we needed to talk in person. The panic in her voice made my stomach drop. I drove to her apartment that night, and the second I walked in, she just broke down crying, full-on sobbing, the kind where you can barely breathe. It took almost 20 minutes to get the story out of her. Turns out Hannah wasn't my biological sister. Our parents had adopted her when she was 3 months old. Closed adoption, very little information about her birth family, and apparently they'd decided never to tell her, or me, or anyone. They just raised her as their biological daughter and let everyone assume we were full siblings. She'd found out by accident 2 years earlier when she'd needed her birth certificate for a passport application and found the adoption papers in the safe. She'd confronted our parents, who'd begged her not to tell me, said it would complicate things, said it didn't matter because she was family regardless, and Hannah had agreed to keep it quiet because she didn't want things to change between us. I sat there processing this while she cried, and honestly, my first reaction was just confusion. Why did it matter? She was still my sister. We'd grown up together. Some paperwork didn't change that. I told her it was fine, that I didn't care, that she'd always be my sister. That's when she admitted why she'd stolen my DNA results. She'd panicked when she saw the 23andMe box, realized that if I took the test, it might show we weren't fully related. She'd been hoping to intercept the results and bury them before I saw. Make the whole thing go away. I asked her why she cared so much. We were adults. Our relationship wasn't going to implode over genetics. And here's where it gets absurd. For the past year and a half, Hannah had been telling our grandmother that she needed money for medical expenses, specifically genetic health issues that ran in our family. She'd spun this whole story about having the same heart condition that killed our grandfather, said she needed medications and specialist appointments, that her insurance wasn't covering everything. Grandma had been giving her thousands of dollars, maybe 15 or 20,000, total over 18 months, except none of it was true. Hannah didn't have a heart condition, didn't have any genetic illness. She'd been using the money to pay off credit card debt from a shopping addiction she'd hidden from everyone. And the whole scam only worked if everyone believed she was genetically related to our grandfather. My DNA results showing we weren't biological siblings would have blown up her entire story. If Grandma found out Hannah was adopted, the genetic illness excuse would fall apart. So she'd stolen my results hoping to keep the lie going. I just stared at her. This wasn't just about keeping family secrets anymore. This was fraud. She'd scammed our elderly grandmother out of thousands of dollars using a fake medical condition. And she'd stolen my mail, invaded my privacy, all to cover it up. I told her she needed to come clean. Tell Grandma the truth, pay back the money, deal with the consequences. Hannah begged me not to say anything, promised she'd pay Grandma back slowly, said she'd figure it out, but please don't tell anyone because it would destroy our family. She kept saying she'd made a mistake, that she'd gotten in too deep, that she never meant for it to go this far. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then I thought about Grandma, 83 years old, on a fixed income, giving away her savings because she thought her granddaughter was sick, thought she was helping family. And Hannah had just taken that money and bought clothes and furniture and God knows what else. I gave her 1 week, told her she had 7 days to tell Grandma everything and start making it right, or I would. She promised she would, said she just needed time to figure out how to explain it. A week passed, then 2. I'd ask Hannah if she'd talked to Grandma yet, and she'd make excuses, said she was waiting for the right time, said Grandma had been stressed about other things and she didn't want to pile on. Classic stalling tactics. Then came the breaking point. I got a call from my mum saying Grandma had just given Hannah another $5,000 for an emergency procedure, some specialist appointment that supposedly couldn't wait. I felt sick. Hannah wasn't coming clean. She was actively continuing the scam, taking more money while promising me she'd stop. That's when I made the decision. I printed out my 23andMe results, the full report showing Hannah and I didn't share enough DNA to be full siblings. I printed out the family tree section showing my connection to Rebecca in Oregon, my actual half-sister from my dad's side that even I hadn't known about. And I drove to Grandma's house. I showed her everything, explained that Hannah was adopted, which meant she couldn't have inherited Grandpa's heart condition, told her about the credit card debt, the lies, all of it. Grandma just sat there at her kitchen table, reading through the papers, and I watched her face shift from confusion to understanding, to something that looked like heartbreak. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She just asked me very quietly if I was sure, if there was any chance I was wrong. I told her I wished I was, but no, this was real. Hannah had been lying for over a year. Grandma called Hannah that afternoon. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Hannah called me afterwards screaming, said I'd ruined her life, destroyed the family, that I was a vindictive, jealous person who couldn't stand that Grandma loved her. She said some things I'm not going to repeat, things you can't take back. Our parents tried to mediate, asked me why I couldn't have just handled it privately, why I had to involve Grandma. I told them that Hannah had already had chances to handle it privately. I'd given her weeks. She'd chosen to keep scamming instead. At some point, protecting Hannah meant enabling her to keep stealing from an elderly woman, and I wasn't going to do that. Grandma didn't press charges, which honestly surprised me, but she did cut Hannah out of her will entirely, demanded repayment of every dollar, set up a payment plan with interest. Hannah had to get a second job to afford it. She moved back in with our parents because she couldn't cover rent anymore. Our relationship never recovered. We don't talk now, haven't in almost 2 years. Family gatherings are awkward, split between people who think I did the right thing and people who think I should have found another way. My parents are caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both of us. The weirdest part? I ended up connecting with Rebecca, my actual half-sister from Oregon. Turns out my dad had a brief relationship before he met my mom. Didn't know Rebecca's mother was pregnant when they broke up. Rebecca had been searching for her biological father for years. We've met a few times now, video chat occasionally. She's kind, funny, works as a teacher. In losing one sister, I guess I gained another. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wish I'd just kept my mouth shut and let Hannah work it out on her own. And honestly, no. Because the truth isn't just about genetics or family secrets. It's about an elderly woman being scammed by someone she trusted. It's about Hannah making a choice every single day to continue lying, to keep taking money, to keep building this elaborate fraud. I didn't destroy our family. Hannah did that when she decided her credit card bills mattered more than honesty. I just refused to help her keep up the lie. And yeah, it cost me a sister, cost me family relationships that might never fully heal. But I can look at myself in the mirror. I can visit grandma without guilt. I can sleep at night knowing I didn't let her keep getting robbed. Sometimes the truth is worth more than keeping the peace. Even when the peace is easier, even when the truth burns everything down. DNA tests can unravel more than ancestry. They can tear apart carefully constructed lies. But what if the lies started even earlier, with a forged legal document that changed everything? When my grandmother passed away, I was devastated. She'd been more than just family to me. She'd practically raised me after my parents divorced when I was 8. I spent every summer at her house, every holiday, every weekend I could manage. We were close in a way that went beyond the typical grandparent-grandchild relationship. She was my person. So when the lawyer read her will and everything went to my cousin Derek, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The house, the savings, the family heirlooms, all of it. Derek got everything, and I got nothing. Here's the thing though, Grandma and I had talked about that house for years, not in some vague, maybe someday way, in specific, concrete terms. She'd told me multiple times that when she passed, the house would be mine. She knew how much I loved it, knew I'd take care of it the way she would have wanted. We'd even talked about what renovations I'd make, which rooms I'd update, whether I'd keep her garden exactly as it was or add to it. Derek, on the other hand, had barely seen Grandma in the last decade. He'd show up for major holidays if it was convenient, stay for an hour and leave. He never called her. Never visited just to visit. When she got sick last year, I was the one at the hospital. I was the one helping her with doctor's appointments and medication schedules. Derek sent a card, so yeah, this will felt wrong, really wrong. But family was telling me to let it go, that Grandma must have had her reasons, that it wasn't worth causing drama over. My own mother said maybe Grandma changed her mind, and I needed to respect that. Even suggested maybe I'd misunderstood our conversations, that I'd heard what I wanted to hear. I didn't misunderstand. I know what Grandma promised me, and something about this whole situation smelled off. I asked to see a copy of the will. The lawyer seemed annoyed but sent it over. I read through it 3 times, looking for anything that seemed strange. The language was formal, legal, exactly what you'd expect. But Grandma's signature at the bottom looked weird. Too neat, too perfect. Grandma had arthritis in her hands for the last 5 years of her life. Her signature had gotten shaky, less controlled. This signature was smooth and confident, like someone had traced it carefully. That's when I decided to hire a forensic document examiner. Cost me $1,500 I didn't really have, but I needed to know. I sent her high-resolution scans of the will, along with other documents I had that Grandma had signed in the last few years of her life. Medical forms, birthday cards, things with her real signature. 2 weeks later, the examiner called me. The signature on the will was forged. Not just probably forged or possibly forged, definitively forged. The pressure points were wrong, the pen strokes didn't match Grandma's natural hand movement, and under magnification you could see where someone had gone over the lines multiple times to make it look authentic. Beyond that, the ink on the signature didn't match the ink on the rest of the document. Different pens, possibly even added later, but that wasn't even the worst part. The examiner also found evidence that the will itself had been altered after the original was created. Whole sections had been retyped and reprinted on different paper stock, then spliced into the original document. Professional job, but not professional enough to fool someone who knew what to look for. Someone had literally forged my grandmother's will and changed the beneficiary from me to Derek. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a change of heart. This was fraud. I sat with that information for a day, trying to process it. My cousin had forged legal documents to steal my inheritance, to steal what Grandma wanted me to have. The anger was overwhelming, but underneath it was this deep sadness. This was family. This was someone I'd grown up with. someone I'd trusted, and he'd done this. I started digging into how he could have pulled this off. Derek worked at a law office, not as a lawyer, just as a paralegal, but he had access to legal documents, official letterhead, the kind of resources you'd need to create a convincing forgery. I checked the date on the will. It was dated 2 weeks after Grandma died. 2 weeks. He'd literally created a fake will after she was already gone. I gathered everything: the forensic report, the examiner's credentials, copies of authentic signatures, the timeline of events, and I took it all to the police. Filing that report felt surreal. I was sitting in a police station, formally accusing my cousin of forgery and fraud. The detective assigned to the case was thorough. He interviewed the lawyer who'd supposedly drawn up the will, who confirmed he'd never met with Grandma, never prepared that document. The letterhead was stolen from his office, where Derek had worked until 6 months ago. They arrested Derek 3 weeks later, charged him with forgery, fraud, theft, and a few other things I didn't fully understand. His mugshot ended up in the local paper. Family lost their minds. Half of them were furious at Derek for what he'd done. The other half were furious at me for involving the police, for not handling it privately, for ruining Derek's life over money. Over money. Like that's all this was. Like Grandma's wishes didn't matter. Like the fact that Derek had committed actual crimes to steal from me was somehow my fault for reporting it. And here's where it gets absurd. Derek's defense was that he'd done it for his family. He had debt, he had kids to support, he needed the money more than I did. As if that justified anything, as if financial stress gives you the right to forge legal documents and steal someone's inheritance. The original will was eventually located. The real one, the one Grandma had actually made with her actual lawyer 5 years before she died. And guess what? It left the house and the majority of her estate to me, exactly like she'd always said. There were provisions for other family members, including Derek, but the house was mine. The court validated the original will. I inherited the house. Derek's trial is still pending, but his lawyers already told him to expect jail time. Forgery and fraud aren't minor offenses, especially when you're talking about estates and wills. His wife left him before the trial even started. She filed for divorce 2 months after his arrest, took their kids, and moved back to her parents' place. He lost his job, obviously. No law office is going to employ someone charged with forging legal documents. Family dinners are incredibly awkward now. Half the family doesn't speak to Derek. The other half doesn't speak to me. My mother's barely talking to me, says I should have just let it go. That family is more important than money or houses. But this wasn't about money. This was about honoring what Grandma wanted. This was about refusing to let someone get away with literal crimes just because we share DNA. I moved into the house 3 months ago. It's exactly how I remember it, exactly how Grandma kept it. I've started working on the garden, adding the flowers she and I used to talk about planting. Every room has memories: the kitchen where she taught me to bake, the living room where we'd watch old movies, the porch where we'd sit and talk for hours. Derek doesn't get to have this. He doesn't get to sell this house and pocket the money and pretend Grandma wanted it that way. Because she didn't. She wanted me to have it. She told me so 100 times, and I wasn't going to let him erase that. Some family members still think I went too far, that I should have confronted Derek privately, worked out some kind of deal, avoided getting the police involved. But here's the thing: Derek committed crimes, multiple crimes, and the only reason anyone thinks I should have looked the other way is because he's family. But being family doesn't mean you get to commit fraud. It doesn't mean your crimes don't count. Justice mattered more than keeping everyone comfortable. Grandma's wishes mattered more than family peace. And honestly, anyone who thinks I was wrong for standing up for what was right probably would have done the same thing Derek did given the opportunity. The house is mine now, legal, official, exactly the way it should have been from the start. And Derek's facing the consequences of his choices. That's not me ruining his life. That's him ruining his own life by thinking he could get away with forging a will. Greed can make people do terrible things, even to family. But sometimes the cruelest betrayals come from those who claim they love you most, like discovering your fiancé has been plotting behind your back. My ex-boyfriend Ryan died in a car accident 3 years ago. At least that's what I was told. I got the call from his sister, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She said he'd been driving home late, lost control on a wet road, hit a tree, gone instantly. I went to the funeral. I saw the casket. I grieved for months, went through all the stages, the denial and anger and eventual acceptance. Ryan had been my first real love, and losing him had broken something in me that took a long time to heal. Eventually, I did heal. I met Tom about a year later. He was kind, stable, everything Ryan hadn't been. Tom had actually known Ryan. They'd been casual friends, which made it easier somehow. He understood what I'd lost. He never made me feel like I had to erase Ryan's memory to make room for him. After a year of dating, Tom proposed. I said yes. We started planning a wedding. I was happy. I thought I'd finally moved past the tragedy and found something good again. Then one night, about 3 months before our wedding, I grabbed Tom's phone to check the time. Mine was dead and charging in the other room. His screen lit up with a text notification. I wasn't trying to snoop, I really wasn't. But the preview was right there on the lock screen. She still doesn't know you're alive. When do we tell her? From a contact saved as just the letter R. My blood ran cold. I read it again, thinking I'd misunderstood. But no, the words were clear. She still doesn't know you're alive. I unlocked Tom's phone. I knew his passcode. We'd never hidden our phones from each other. I opened the message thread with R and started scrolling. Months of messages. Years, actually. Going back to right after Ryan's supposed death. This is where patience finally snapped. The messages were casual, friendly. Inside jokes, updates about life. And slowly, as I scrolled further back, the truth assembled itself in front of me like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. R was Ryan. Ryan was alive. He'd faked his death, and Tom had known the entire time. I sat on our bathroom floor reading through years of text messages between my dead ex-boyfriend and my fiancée, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Ryan had been in debt, serious debt, gambling debts to the kind of people who don't just let you walk away. He'd apparently owed someone $50,000 and couldn't pay, so he'd staged a car accident, paid someone off to fake the police report, had his sister lie to everyone including me, and disappeared. Started over somewhere else with a new identity, and Tom had helped him do it. Had been helping him this whole time, sending him money every month, keeping his secret, lying to me for 2 years while I mourned someone who was alive and well and living in another state. I felt like I was going to throw up, but I kept reading because I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done. That's when I found the messages from a few months ago, right around the time Tom proposed to me. Ryan had asked if Tom was really going to marry me without telling me the truth. Tom had replied that the plan was to wait until after the wedding, then sit me down and explain everything. They'd tell me Ryan was alive, that he'd had no choice, that he needed help getting back on his feet, and they assumed that once I was legally married to Tom, once I was locked in, I'd have no choice but to go along with it. Maybe even help Ryan rebuild his life, financially and otherwise. They'd planned this, both of them. They'd conspired to manipulate me into a marriage built on lies so they could eventually guilt me into supporting the ex-boyfriend I thought I'd buried. The level of calculation was breathtaking. Tom hadn't fallen in love with me despite knowing Ryan was alive. He'd pursued me because of it. This whole relationship had been part of their plan. I was a mark, a long-term investment. I sat there on that bathroom floor for probably an hour, just staring at Tom's phone, reading and rereading messages that dismantled my entire reality. When I finally stood up, I wasn't crying. I was calm, cold, actually, because I knew exactly what I needed to do. I tracked the phone number, reverse lookup, paid service, gave me a name and address. Ryan Mitchell, living in an apartment complex 2 states away. Very much alive. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every admission, every detail of their plan. Then I put Tom's phone back exactly where I'd found it and went to bed. Tom came home an hour later, kissed me goodnight, told me he loved me. I smiled and said I loved him too, and I started planning. The next morning, I told Tom I needed to run some errands. Instead, I drove 4 hours to Ryan's apartment. I knocked on his door. He answered, "Boy," and the look on his face when he saw me was almost worth the drive. Pure terror. He tried to close the door, but I wedged my foot in and told him very calmly that he had 2 choices. He could sit down and explain everything to me right now, or I could call the police and report him for fraud and identity theft. He let me in. Ryan looked different, thinner, older, tired. He tried to explain himself, said he'd had no choice, that the people he owed money to would have killed him. Maybe that was true. I didn't care. I asked him about Tom, about the plan. He admitted it all, said Tom had suggested it actually, that Tom thought if he married me, we'd have access to my inheritance from my grandmother, and they could use that money to finally pay off Ryan's debts and bring him back from the dead publicly. I'd be understanding, they'd assumed, because I loved both of them. Imagine being this confidently wrong. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Ryan was too panicked to notice. He kept apologizing, kept saying he'd never meant to hurt me, that it had all just gotten out of control. I let him talk, let him incriminate himself thoroughly. Then I left. I drove home. Tom was there when I got back, making dinner like everything was normal. I sat him down and I asked him directly. I said I knew about Ryan. I knew everything, and I wanted to hear it from him. To his credit, he didn't try to deny it. He looked relieved, actually, like he'd been waiting for this moment. He explained the whole plan, filled in the gaps Ryan had left, confirmed that yes, they'd been planning to wait until after we were married, that yes, they'd intended to use my money, that he'd pursued me specifically because I was Ryan's ex, and they thought I'd be easier to manipulate because of our history. But that wasn't even the worst part. Tom also admitted he'd been transferring money from our joint account to Ryan for over a year. Small amounts, nothing I'd notice, but it added up to nearly $15,000. Money I'd contributed to. Money I thought we were saving for our future. He'd been slowly stealing from me to fund my supposedly dead ex-boyfriend's new life. I asked him if he'd ever actually loved me, or if I'd just been a convenient target. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I called off the wedding the next day, told our families there'd been a fundamental breach of trust, and left it at that. Most people assumed Tom had cheated. I didn't correct them. The real story was too insane to explain, and I didn't owe anyone the details. Then I reported Ryan to the authorities, turned over all the evidence, the messages, the recording, everything. Faking your death is fraud. Using a false identity is identity theft. The money he'd received from Tom, transferred from our joint account without my knowledge or consent, made it financial fraud too. Ryan was arrested within a week. Tom was investigated as an accomplice. They both lawyered up immediately. I got restraining orders against both of them, changed my locks, changed my number, deleted every photo, every message, every trace of Tom from my life, moved out of the apartment we'd shared and into a new place where neither of them knew the address. The legal stuff is still ongoing. Ryan's looking at serious charges. Tom might face charges too. Or at least he'll be involved in a very messy civil suit when I sue him for the money he stole. His reputation is destroyed. His family won't speak to him. Mutual friends have taken my side universally because what he did was so far beyond the pale that there's no defending it. They deserved each other, honestly. Two manipulative liars who thought they could build a scheme on my grief and my trust. They thought I'd be easy to control, that love or loyalty or just plain shock would keep me compliant once the truth came out. They were wrong, and now they're both paying for it. Faking a death is one level of twisted, but secretly recording someone without their knowledge, that's a whole different kind of violation. I found the camera by accident, complete accident. I was looking for my phone charger one morning because mine had stopped working, and I grabbed what I thought was Alex's spare from the nightstand. Except when I picked it up, it felt weird, too heavy. I turned it over and saw a tiny lens embedded in the plastic. My first thought was that I was being paranoid, that it was just a reflection or a design flaw, but I looked closer and there was no denying it. This was a camera, a hidden camera, disguised as a phone charger, in our bedroom, pointed directly at our bed. I felt my skin crawl. I checked the other chargers around the apartment, found two more, one in the living room angled toward the couch, another in the kitchen, all of them recording. All of them placed in spots where Alex and I had our worst arguments over the past few months. I confronted Alex immediately. Walked into the home office where they were editing something on their laptop and held up the charger camera. Asked what the hell this was. Alex didn't even try to deny it. Just sighed like I was being dramatic and said they needed evidence. Evidence of what? Of me being emotionally abusive, apparently. Of me gaslighting them, manipulating them, making them feel crazy. I stood there, stunned, because that was the exact opposite of what had been happening. Alex was the one who twisted every conversation, who made me question my own memory, who would start fights out of nowhere and then act like I was the aggressor when I defended myself. And now I was finding out they'd been recording it all? For what? That's when I saw their laptop screen. TikTok. Their account was open and I could see video thumbnails, clips of me. Clips of us arguing, my face red, my voice raised, me gesturing angrily. And the captions, oh the captions. Living with a narcissist. When your partner shows their true colors. Documenting abuse for my own safety. I grabbed the laptop, scrolled through their profile. They had over 50,000 followers. 50,000 people watching carefully edited clips of our worst moments. Except the clips only showed my reactions. Never what Alex had said to provoke them. Never the gaslighting, the insults, the deliberate button pushing. Just me, looking like a monster. The comments were worse. Thousands of people telling Alex to leave me, calling me abusive, saying I deserved to be exposed. Some were sending direct threats, saying they'd find me, that I deserved everything coming to me. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the laptop. Alex tried to take it back, said I was invading their privacy. Their privacy. They'd been secretly recording me for months, posting edited footage to make me look abusive, and I was invading their privacy by finding out. I left the apartment that day, went to stay with a friend because I genuinely didn't feel safe anymore. Not just because of the cameras, but because I realized Alex had been building a narrative. A public narrative where I was the villain and they were the victim, and thousands of strangers believed it. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 days later, I started getting messages. People had found my social media, my workplace. I was getting emails at my job calling me an abuser. My boss pulled me into a meeting asking if there was anything I needed to tell them about my personal life. Someone had sent the TikTok videos to my company's HR department. This is where patience finally snapped. I couldn't just let this keep happening. Alex had weaponized social media against me, had violated my privacy, had potentially destroyed my career and reputation. So I did what I should have done immediately. I went to a lawyer. The lawyer listened to everything, watched some of the TikTok videos, and told me this was illegal recording. In our state, you can't record someone without their consent in a private space. What Alex had done was a crime. We could press charges, but more than that, I had options for a civil case: defamation, invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. But I wanted more than legal action. I wanted the truth out there. The lawyer advised me carefully, told me what I could and couldn't do legally, and we came up with a plan. I still had access to our shared cloud storage. Alex had been backing up all the recordings there, probably as evidence for their narrative. But they'd saved everything, not just the edited clips, the full, unedited footage, hours and hours of it. And in that footage, you could see exactly what had really been happening. You could see Alex starting arguments out of nowhere, saying cruel, cutting things designed to hurt me. You could see them literally setting up the cameras before provoking fights. You could see me trying to de-escalate, trying to walk away, and Alex following me, pushing, needling, until I finally snapped and raised my voice. And then you could see them smirking slightly as they walked away, knowing they'd gotten the reaction they wanted on camera. I made my own video, a long one. I showed my face, used my real name, and I explained everything. I showed the hidden cameras. I played clips from the full, unedited footage with timestamps, showing exactly what Alex had cut out. I showed messages between us where Alex admitted to starting fights on purpose. I exposed every single manipulation, every lie, every carefully edited clip that had made me look abusive, and then I posted it, not on TikTok where Alex could get it taken down easily, but on YouTube, on Reddit, everywhere I could think of. I tagged it with Alex's TikTok handle, so anyone searching for their content would find mine too. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The video went viral faster than Alex's clips ever had. People were horrified, not at me, at Alex, at the level of manipulation and deception it took to edit footage that carefully, to build an entire false narrative, to destroy someone's life for social media clout. Alex's comment sections turned. Their followers started questioning everything. People began reporting their account for harassment and misinformation. Within 72 hours, TikTok banned them. Permanently. 50,000 followers, months of content, their entire influencer persona gone. But it didn't stop there. Alex's employer saw the videos, both mine and theirs. They worked in social media management, ironically, and their company decided that someone who manipulated footage and lied to thousands of people online wasn't someone they wanted representing their brand. Alex was fired within the week. The legal case moved forward. My lawyer filed charges for illegal recording. The police actually took it seriously once they saw the evidence and the online harassment I'd received because of it. Alex tried to claim they'd been documenting abuse for their safety, but the full footage contradicted that completely. You can't claim self-defense when the videos show you deliberately provoking someone, setting up cameras to catch their reaction, and then editing out your own behavior. I moved out permanently, found a new apartment across town, changed my number, locked down all my social media. Started therapy because living through that level of gaslighting and then discovering you'd been secretly recorded for months does something to your head. My therapist said what Alex did was a form of intimate partner violence, using technology and social manipulation to control and harm me. I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. Alex tried to rebuild online, created new accounts under different names, but the internet doesn't forget. People recognized them. Screenshots of the original videos circulated. Every time they tried to restart their influencer career, someone would show up with receipts. The criminal case ended with Alex pleading guilty to illegal recording. They got probation and a fine, nothing major, but it's on their record now. The civil case settled. I can't talk about the terms, but let's just say it covered my legal fees and then some. People ask me if I feel bad about destroying Alex's online presence, their job, their reputation. Honestly, no, not even a little. They tried to destroy mine first. They violated my privacy, manipulated thousands of people, subjected me to harassment and threats, almost cost me my career. All for what? Social media followers, validation from strangers, the satisfaction of playing victim while actually being the perpetrator. They built their entire online persona on a lie, on edited footage designed to make me look like an abuser, while hiding their own behavior. So when I showed the truth, when I exposed what they'd really been doing, their persona collapsed. That's not me destroying anything. That's just what happens when you build something on a foundation of lies. Eventually it falls apart. I'm doing better now. New apartment, new routines, new boundaries. I'm hyper aware of technology in my space. I check for cameras regularly, probably more than I need to. But I'm rebuilding. And I'm doing it honestly, without manipulation, without secret recordings, without turning my trauma into content for strangers to consume. Alex's influencer career? Completely destroyed. And honestly, good. Some people shouldn't have platforms. Recording fights in secret is manipulation at its finest. But what if your partner's deception goes even further, like creating an entirely separate life behind your back? My mum was thrilled when I got engaged, or at least that's what she said. She cried happy tears, hugged my fiancé Daniel, told me she'd been waiting for this day since I was a little girl. When she offered to help plan the wedding, I thought it was the perfect mother-daughter bonding opportunity. We'd never been super close, but this felt like our chance to finally connect. I should have known something was off when she volunteered to handle the venue booking. She said she had connections, knew people, could get us a better deal than I'd find on my own. I was working full-time and planning a wedding is exhausting, so I let her take the lead. Big mistake. 2 months before the wedding, I got a call from the venue I thought we'd booked. They were calling to confirm we'd cancelled and wouldn't be needing their services. I told them there must be some mistake. We hadn't cancelled anything. The woman on the phone sounded confused, said someone named Patricia, my mother's name, had called 3 days ago and cancelled our reservation, forfeiting the deposit. I hung up and immediately called my mum. She acted shocked, said it must have been a mix-up, that she'd call them and sort it out. But when I followed up with the venue directly, they said they were fully booked now and couldn't accommodate us. The date we'd wanted was gone. My mum suggested we just pick a new date, maybe push it back 6 months, no big deal. Except it was a big deal. We'd already sent save the dates. Daniel's family had booked flights. Everything was planned around that specific weekend. Then the guest list started disappearing. My cousin called asking why she wasn't invited anymore. Then my college roommate. Then 3 of Daniel's co-workers. I checked my spreadsheet and they were all still listed, but when I asked my mum about it, she said she'd been streamlining things, cutting people who weren't that close to us anyway, without asking me. She'd literally gone through and uninvited people based on her own judgment. I told her to stop helping, that I'd handle everything myself from now on. She got quiet and said fine, if that's what I wanted, but she was just trying to make things easier for me. That's when the trash talking started. She'd call relatives and say Daniel was controlling, that she was worried about me, that maybe we were rushing into things. My aunt called me concerned, saying Mom had expressed doubts about the marriage. When I confronted her, she said I was overreacting, that she'd just been venting normal mother of the bride anxieties. Nothing about this was normal. The final straw came 3 weeks before what was supposed to be my wedding day. I'd found a new venue, re-invited everyone personally, basically started from scratch. My mum asked to meet for coffee to apologize and make things right. I agreed because, despite everything, she was still my mum. We met at a cafe near her house. She seemed nervous, kept checking her phone, barely touched her latte. When I asked what was going on, she snapped, told me I was selfish for making everything about my wedding, that I never thought about anyone else's feelings, that getting married right now was the most inconsiderate thing I could do. I just stared at her, asked what she was talking about. She stood up, said forget it, and walked out. Left me sitting there completely baffled. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about her reaction felt bigger than normal mother-daughter tension, so I did something I'm not proud of. I went through her Facebook messages on the family iPad she sometimes left at my place, and here's where it gets absurd. There were messages to people I'd never heard of, a man named Richard sending her photos of kids I didn't recognize, messages about dinner plans and soccer games and mortgage payments. She was calling him honey, calling these random kids sweetie and baby, talking about their life together like it was completely normal. I scrolled back months, years. The messages went back over a decade. There were photos of her at birthday parties I'd never attended, holiday celebrations with a whole different family, even a wedding anniversary post from 5 years ago. Not her anniversary with my dad, an anniversary with Richard. My mum had a second family, a complete second life 3 hours away in a different city. A husband who wasn't my father, 2 kids who had no idea I existed. She'd been living a double life for 15 years. I felt like I was losing my mind. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to myself, then spent the rest of the night trying to process what I'd discovered. The sick sister story. Every other week she'd drive to visit her sick sister, who lived a few hours away and needed help. There was no sick sister. She was visiting her other family, her other husband, her other kids. Suddenly, the wedding sabotage made sense. A big public wedding meant attention, meant both sides of the family potentially intersecting, meant questions about why certain people weren't invited, why she seemed stressed, why she kept trying to postpone or cancel. My wedding was a threat to her entire constructed reality. But that wasn't even the worst part. I contacted Richard through Facebook, sent him a message introducing myself as Patricia's daughter and asking if we could talk. He responded within an hour, confused but polite. We arranged a phone call. When I told him who I was, there was a long silence. Then he said that was impossible. Patricia didn't have any other children. I sent him photos of me with my mum from my childhood, from recent holidays, everything. He went quiet again. Then he said he needed to call me back. He called back 2 hours later, said he'd confronted my mum and she'd admitted everything. His voice was shaking. He'd been married to her for 12 years, had 2 kids with her, had no idea she had a whole other family. She'd told him she was widowed before they met, that her first husband had died in an accident, that she'd needed a fresh start. My dad wasn't dead. My dad was alive and still married to her. They'd never divorced. She was committing bigamy. I called my dad next, told him everything. He didn't believe me at first, thought I was stressed about wedding planning and imagining things. I sent him the screenshots, the photos, Richard's contact information, watched his entire world collapse over the phone. Things went from bad to unhinged. Both families imploded simultaneously. My dad filed for divorce immediately. Richard did the same. My mum tried to explain, tried to say it was complicated, that she'd felt trapped and made mistakes, but she loved all of us. Nobody wanted to hear it. Her other kids, teenagers who thought they had a normal, stable family, were devastated. I felt awful for them. None of this was their fault. They were victims of her lies just like the rest of us. The wedding planning stopped entirely. I couldn't focus on flower arrangements and seating charts while my entire family was disintegrating. Daniel suggested we just elope, skip all the drama, start our marriage without the chaos. I agreed immediately. We flew to Colorado 2 weeks later and got married at a tiny chapel with just Daniel's parents as witnesses. It was quiet and simple and honestly perfect. No drama, no sabotage, no lying mother trying to protect her secret double life. My mum tried to apologize, sent long emails explaining her reasoning, how she'd felt stuck in her marriage with my dad, how she'd met Richard and fallen in love but didn't know how to leave, how it had spiraled out of control over the years. She said she'd been planning to come clean eventually, but the timing was never right. The timing was never right, because there's never a right time to admit you've been living a complete lie for over a decade. I didn't respond to her emails, didn't take her calls, cut her off completely. My dad did the same. Richard's family wanted nothing to do with her. She ended up alone in an apartment by herself, having lost both families, both husbands, all her kids. People sometimes ask if I feel bad for her, if I regret cutting her off so completely. And honestly, no. She didn't just make a mistake. She built an elaborate years-long deception that hurt everyone who loved her. She sabotaged my wedding to protect her lies. She called me selfish while she was literally maintaining two separate families. Some bridges you just burn. It's been 2 years now. I'm happily married to Daniel. We have a small house and a dog and a life that's blissfully drama-free. My dad's doing better, dating someone new who's actually honest with him. Richard remarried too, from what I heard. I sometimes think about my half-siblings, wonder how they're doing, if they blame me for exposing everything. But I didn't create this mess. I just refused to keep pretending it didn't exist. My mum sends a card every birthday, every holiday. I don't open them. Maybe someday I will. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear whatever explanation she thinks will make this okay. But right now, I'm good. I'm happy. And I don't need her chaos in my life. Mothers are supposed to protect us, not destroy our lives to hide their secrets. But parents can surprise you in the worst ways, like when you catch your dad in a lie and uncover something far darker. I got caught sneaking out when I was 17. Nothing crazy, just meeting up with friends at a party my dad had explicitly told me I couldn't go to. I thought I was being smart about it, waited until I heard him snoring, climbed out my bedroom window like some bad teen movie. Except our motion sensor light kicked on when I hit the driveway, and suddenly my dad was standing at the front door in his bathrobe, asking where exactly I thought I was going at 11:30 on a school night. The lecture that followed was brutal. He went on for over an hour about trust and responsibility, and how lying destroys relationships, how disappointed he was that I'd chosen deception over honesty, how actions have consequences, and I needed to understand that before I became an adult. He grounded me for a month, took my car keys, my phone, everything. Said I needed to learn that integrity matters. The whole time he's going off, I'm sitting there thinking about how he'd lied to me just last week, about why he couldn't make my basketball game. Said he had to work late, but I'd driven past his office on the way home and his car wasn't there. Or how he told my mom he'd quit smoking, but I'd found cigarette butts in the garage. Small stuff, sure, but the hypocrisy was suffocating. So I did what any angry, grounded teenager with too much time would do. I started digging through his stuff out of pure spite. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted something, anything, to throw back at him the next time he started preaching about honesty. I spent hours going through boxes in the attic while he was at work. Old tax returns, college textbooks, photos from before I was born. Most of it was boring. Then I found a small cardboard box shoved behind the Christmas decorations, taped shut like someone really didn't want it opened. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellow, brittle, dated from 1998. The headlines made my stomach drop. Local man arrested in armed robbery. Suspect pleads guilty, faces 5 years. And there in the article was a name I didn't recognize, Michael James Cordero, but the photo was unmistakably my dad. Younger, harder looking, but definitely him. I sat there in the dusty attic reading through every article, every court document he'd kept. My dad had robbed a convenience store at gunpoint when he was 23. He'd been arrested, pleaded guilty, served 5 years in state prison, got out when he was 28, and apparently decided to reinvent himself completely. Changed his name legally from Michael Cordero to David Chen, his mother's maiden name. Started over, met my mum 2 years later, built this whole life where no one knew who he used to be. The person lecturing me about integrity and honesty had literally buried his entire criminal past and never told anyone. Not my mum, not me, not our extended family. He'd built our entire family on a foundation of omission and lies. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to throw it in his face immediately. Watch him try to explain his way out of calling me a liar when he'd been lying about his entire identity for decades. But another part of me was just confused and hurt. This was my dad, the guy who coached my little league team and helped with homework and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. How did that person connect to someone who'd pointed a gun at a clerk and demanded money? I kept quiet for 3 days, went to school, came home, barely spoke to either of my parents. My mum asked if something was wrong, and I said I was fine. My dad probably thought I was just sulking about being grounded. Then he started in on another lecture. I'd left a dish in the sink instead of putting it in the dishwasher, and somehow this became a 20-minute speech about respect and responsibility and following the rules of the house. That's when everything unraveled. I went upstairs, got the box, brought it down, and dropped it on the kitchen table in front of him. Told him if he wanted to talk about honesty and following rules, maybe we should discuss his armed robbery conviction first. The color drained from his face. My mom looked confused, asked what I was talking about. My dad just stared at the box like it was a bomb about to explode, which, I guess in a way, it was. He tried to deflect at first, said those articles were about someone else, that I was confused. But my mom had already opened the box, was reading through the clippings, and I could see the exact moment she put it together. She looked at him and asked very quietly if this was real. If Michael James Cordero was him. He broke down, actually started crying right there at the kitchen table. Something I'd never seen him do. Told us everything, how he'd been young and stupid and broke, how he'd made the worst decision of his life in about 30 seconds, how prison had destroyed him, but also forced him to face who he'd become, how he'd gotten out determined to be someone different, someone better. He'd changed his name because he knew no one would hire Michael Cordero, the convicted felon. He'd never told my mum because by the time they were serious enough that he should have said something, he was terrified she'd leave. Then I was born and the secret got bigger and harder to tell. He said he'd spent 20 years waiting for this exact moment, knowing eventually someone would find out and his whole life would fall apart. My mum was devastated, not just about the robbery, but about the lying. 22 years of marriage built on him never mentioning he'd been in prison. She left the room, locked herself in their bedroom. My dad and I sat there in horrible silence. I wanted to feel vindicated. I'd caught him in the ultimate hypocrisy, but mostly I just felt sick. This wasn't the gotcha moment I'd imagined. This was watching my family implode in real time. Over the next few weeks, my parents had a lot of painful conversations. My mum considered leaving. She moved into the guest room for a while. They went to counseling. Slowly, gradually, she decided to stay. Said everyone deserves a second chance, that the man he'd become mattered more than who he'd been. But their relationship was different after that. More careful, less certain. My dad and I had our own reckoning. I told him I'd keep his secret from extended family, from my grandparents and aunts and uncles who didn't know, but only if he stopped with the hypocritical lectures, stopped acting like he was some moral authority when he'd literally served time for armed robbery. He agreed, said he'd been overcompensating, trying to make sure I didn't make the same mistakes he had. Realized he'd been so terrified of me going down a bad path that he'd become overbearing and dishonest in his own way. We talked for hours that night, really talked, maybe for the first time ever. He told me about prison, about how scared he'd been, about the people he'd met and the things he'd seen, about how desperate he'd been to make sure his past stayed buried. Our relationship changed after that. It's more honest now, but also more fragile. There's this awareness that we both know things about each other we can't unknow. He knows I'm capable of sneaking out and lying. I know he's capable of violence and reinvention. We're more careful with each other, more real, but also more distant in some ways. I never did tell extended family. It's been 3 years now, and my grandparents still don't know their son served time. My dad's siblings don't know. It's his secret to tell or keep, and I decided I'd already done enough damage bringing it out into our immediate family. The irony isn't lost on me. He caught me lying about sneaking out, so I exposed the lie he'd been living for 2 decades. We both hurt each other trying to prove points about honesty, and now we're both stuck living with the aftermath. I'm in college now, moved out last year. When I come home for breaks, things are cordial but complicated. My parents are still together but different. My dad never lectures me anymore, actually rarely gives me any advice at all. Sometimes I miss the version of him who felt confident enough to parent. Other times I'm relieved I don't have to listen to someone preach values they don't fully live up to. People who knew my dad before, family friends, neighbors, they still see him as this upstanding guy. Reliable, honest, involved in the community, and he is those things now, but he's also someone who made terrible choices and spent years hiding them. Both things are true. That's the part I'm still learning to accept. The people who preach morality the loudest really do have the most to hide sometimes. My dad proved that, but he also proved people can change, can become better versions of themselves, even if the past never fully goes away. I'm still figuring out how I feel about all of it. Probably will be for a long time. Parents hiding criminal pasts is shocking enough. But what about when a friend actively frames you for something you didn't do? I thought Casey was my best friend. We'd known each other since college, been through everything together. Bad breakups, worse jobs, family drama, all of it. So when I started dating Jordan, it felt natural to include Casey in that part of my life too. She seemed genuinely happy for me, always asking how things were going, always available to listen when I needed to vent about the normal, early relationship stuff. Looking back, maybe she was a little too interested, too available, too supportive in a way that felt slightly off, but I didn't see it then. Jordan and I had been together about 8 months when things started getting weird. Small things at first. Jordan would make comments about me being distant, about seeming distracted. I brushed it off as normal relationship anxiety. Then the accusations started. Little questions about where I'd been, who I'd been talking to. I figured Jordan was just insecure and needed reassurance. I gave it freely because I had nothing to hide. Then one night, Jordan showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking devastated. Asked if we could talk, sat me down and pulled out a phone, started scrolling through screenshots, text messages, from my number, to some guy named Marcus. Flirty texts, suggestive texts, plans to meet up, even photos that looked like they'd been taken in my apartment, showing parts of my body in ways that suggested I'd sent them to someone I was having an affair with. I stared at those screenshots completely confused. I'd never sent those messages. Didn't know anyone named Marcus. The photos looked like me, but I had no memory of taking them. I tried to explain this to Jordan, said someone must have faked them somehow, but even as I said it, I knew how insane it sounded. Jordan wanted to believe me. I could see it, but the evidence was right there. My number, my apartment, images that really did look like me. Jordan left that night, said we needed space while I figured out what was going on. I sat alone in my apartment, going through my phone, trying to find any trace of these messages. They weren't in my sent folder, weren't anywhere. I checked my phone records online, looking at the logs of every text I'd sent in the past 3 months. The messages to Marcus didn't show up, because I hadn't sent them. That's when I started thinking about who had access to my phone, who could have used it without me noticing, and I remembered Casey had borrowed it several times recently, said her phone was dead and she needed to make calls or check something. I'd handed it over without thinking because that's what friends do. You trust each other. I did some research, found out about texting apps that let you send messages from any number you want, spoofing services, ways to fake text conversations that look completely real in screenshots. And I realized Casey could have done this, could have taken my phone when I wasn't looking, snapped photos, used them to build a fake affair that would destroy my relationship. But why would she do that? We were best friends. She had no reason to sabotage me, except I started thinking about how much time she'd been spending with Jordan lately, how she'd been inviting Jordan to things without me, saying I was busy or couldn't make it, how she'd been offering Jordan a shoulder to cry on about our relationship problems she'd potentially created. Oh, so we're doing that now? I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse her based on a theory, so I set up a trap. I called another mutual friend, Maya, someone Casey trusted, told Maya everything, asked her to have coffee with Casey and bring up my relationship, see if Casey would say anything incriminating. Maya agreed to record the conversation on her phone. They met the next day. Maya asked Casey if she'd heard that Jordan and I were having problems. Casey played concerned, said she'd heard, said she felt bad for both of us. Then Maya pushed a little, asked if Casey thought maybe Jordan and I just weren't right for each other, and Casey took the bait. She said Jordan deserved better than someone who couldn't be faithful. Said she'd seen the evidence herself, that I'd been cheating and Jordan should move on. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She told Maya that she'd always thought she and Jordan would be good together, that maybe once the dust settled from my mess, she'd be there for Jordan. Help Jordan heal, see where things went. Maya kept her talking, got her to admit she'd used my phone to create the fake messages. Casey actually laughed about it, said it had been easier than she thought, said I'd been so trusting, so stupid, just handing over my phone whenever she asked. She'd installed the spoofing app, sent the messages to a fake number, taken screenshots, then deleted the app before giving my phone back. The photos had been taken from my social media and edited slightly to make them look new and intimate. She'd planned the whole thing, methodically destroyed my relationship so she could step in and take Jordan for herself, and she was proud of it. Maya sent me the recording that night. I listened to it 3 times, feeling sick. This person I trusted completely had betrayed me in the most calculated way possible, not out of anger or jealousy over something I'd done to her, just because she wanted what I had and decided she deserved it more. I made a plan, invited both Casey and Jordan over to my apartment. Told Casey I needed support because Jordan and I were probably breaking up for good. Told Jordan I had proof I hadn't cheated and needed to show it in person. They both agreed to come, different times, but I told each of them to arrive at the same time without the other knowing. When they both showed up at my door simultaneously, the confusion on their faces would have been funny if I wasn't so angry. I let them both in, sat them down, and I played the recording. Casey's face went white as she heard her own voice admitting to everything, talking about how she'd framed me, laughing about how easy I'd been to manipulate, saying she wanted Jordan for herself. Jordan just sat there, staring at Casey like seeing a stranger. The betrayal was written all over Jordan's face. Casey tried to lie, said Maya had edited the recording, that I'd fabricated it somehow, that this was all a misunderstanding, but her voice was shaking and her excuses were weak, and everyone in that room knew the truth. Then I pulled up the app data on my phone, showed Jordan the metadata proving when Casey had accessed my phone, matched it to the timestamps on the fake messages. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Casey stood up and tried to turn it around on me, started yelling that I was a terrible friend, that I'd never appreciated her, that Jordan was better off without me anyway. Said maybe she'd done the wrong thing, but her intentions were good, because Jordan deserved someone who would actually put in effort. The mental gymnastics were impressive. She'd literally framed me for cheating and was now acting like she'd done me a favor. Jordan told her to leave. Just flat out said, "Get out of the apartment." Casey looked at Jordan, expecting support or sympathy or something. When she didn't get it, she grabbed her bag and ran out, actually crying, like she was the victim in this situation. Jordan turned to me after Casey left, apologized for not believing me, said the evidence had seemed so real, but that wasn't an excuse, asked if we could start over, rebuild the trust, and I wanted to say yes. Part of me really did, but I couldn't, because Jordan had been willing to believe I'd cheated based on screenshots, had been ready to throw away our relationship without even giving me a real chance to defend myself, and had apparently been spending enough time with Casey that she'd felt comfortable making a move. I told Jordan I appreciated the apology, but I was done, with both of them. Casey for obvious reasons, but also with Jordan for not trusting me enough to at least investigate before assuming the worst. Trust, once shattered, can't be glued back together. Not really. You can try, but you'll always see the cracks. Jordan left quietly. I heard later from Maya that Jordan and Casey never spoke again, that Casey tried to reach out, tried to apologize, but Jordan wanted nothing to do with her. I also heard Casey lost several other friends once word got out about what she'd done. Turns out people don't like manipulative liars, even when they're not the direct victims. I blocked them both, deleted their numbers, unfriended them on everything, removed every trace of them from my life. Started therapy to work through the betrayal, because having your best friend systematically destroy your relationship is the kind of thing that messes with your ability to trust anyone. It's been almost a year now. I'm doing better. Dating again, carefully. I have new friends, people who've proven themselves trustworthy over time. I don't talk to Casey or Jordan. Don't plan to ever again. Some people don't deserve second chances, and I'm finally okay with accepting that. Casey wanted Jordan badly enough to destroy our friendship and my relationship, and in the end, she lost both of us anyway. That's not karma. That's just consequences. Sometimes the person digging a grave for someone else ends up falling into it themselves. Betrayal from a best friend cuts deep, but workplace sabotage can destroy your entire career, especially when someone's jealousy spirals out of control. I spent 3 months on that presentation. 3 months of late nights, weekend research, client calls, design revisions. It was for a major account, the kind that could define your career trajectory at the company. I'd poured everything into it. Every slide was perfect, every data point verified, every visual element custom designed to match the client's brand guidelines. The presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday. Wednesday night, I did one final review, saved everything to both my computer and the shared drive, and went home feeling confident, prepared, ready. Thursday morning, I got to the office an hour early to do a tech check, opened my laptop. The presentation file was gone, just gone. I checked the shared drive, not there either. I searched every folder, checked the trash, looked everywhere. Nothing. My heart was racing. I had backups on a USB drive at home, but there wasn't time to go get it. The client was arriving in 45 minutes. I ran to my manager's office in a panic, explained what had happened. That's when Melissa walked in holding her laptop, looking calm and professional, and said she had a presentation ready to go. Said she'd been working on the same project as a backup plan because she'd had concerns about my approach. My manager looked relieved, told me we'd use Melissa's version and discuss what happened with my files later. I sat in that conference room watching Melissa present what was clearly a rushed, half-finished version of my work. She'd used the same framework, the same client research, even some of the same phrasing from early drafts I'd shared with the team. But it was incomplete, poorly organized, missing half the data points that made the strategy actually viable. The client was polite but clearly unimpressed. The meeting ended with them saying they'd need to reconsider the partnership. After they left, Melissa had the audacity to tell our manager that the presentation had flopped because I hadn't collaborated enough with her, that I'd been territorial about my research and hadn't shared key information. She made it sound like I'd sabotaged the team by working in isolation. My manager actually seemed to believe her. I was furious, beyond furious, but I couldn't prove anything yet. I needed to figure out how my files had disappeared. It helped me check the access logs on my computer. Someone had logged in remotely at 11:30 p.m. the night before using my credentials, deleted the presentation files, cleared the trash, even deleted the backup versions from the shared drive. But here's the thing about remote access. It leaves a trail. It pulled the IP address. It was Melissa. She'd accessed my computer from her home network, deleted everything, and then conveniently showed up the next morning with her own version ready to go. I had proof she'd sabotaged me. I took it to HR immediately. But before I could even submit the formal complaint, I noticed something while reviewing the access logs. Melissa had been using the company network for personal activities. A lot of personal activities. Specifically, she'd been logged into an Etsy shop. Her Etsy shop based on the username. Curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the shop, and that's when everything unraveled. Melissa was selling design work on Etsy, custom branding packages, logo designs, marketing materials, the kind of stuff that looked professional and polished, the kind of stuff that takes real skill and time to create. She had hundreds of sales, 5-star reviews. She was charging premium prices, anywhere from $500 to $3,000 per package. And every single design she was selling was stolen from our company's client files. I recognized the work immediately. Logos we'd developed for clients, brand guidelines from projects I'd worked on, marketing materials from campaigns that had cost our clients tens of thousands of dollars. She'd taken confidential files from our shared drive, made minor modifications, and was reselling them as her own original work to random people on the internet. This wasn't just sabotage anymore. This was theft, copyright infringement, violation of NDAs. She was literally selling our clients' proprietary designs for personal profit. I started documenting everything: screenshots of her Etsy listings with timestamps, comparisons showing the original client files next to her Etsy products, sales records showing she'd made over $40,000 in the past year, evidence that she'd accessed specific client folders on our shared drive right before posting corresponding designs to her shop. The more I dug, the worse it got. She'd been doing this for at least 18 months. Dozens of clients, hundreds of stolen designs. She'd been careful, mostly targeting older projects or clients who'd since moved on, betting that no one would notice, but she'd gotten sloppy recently. Some of the designs she was selling were from active accounts, current clients who were still paying us monthly retainers. And here's where it gets absurd. One of her Etsy customers had left a review complaining that they'd seen their custom logo being used by another company. Because of course they had. Because it wasn't custom. It was stolen from one of our actual clients. Melissa had sold the same logo to multiple people on Etsy, and now there were businesses in different states using identical branding because they'd all bought the same stolen design. I compiled everything into a report: screenshots, file comparisons, access logs, sales records, timestamps showing exactly when she'd accessed client files and when corresponding Etsy listings had gone live. It was airtight, undeniable. I sent it to HR, sent it to our legal team, sent it to my manager with a note explaining that this was why I was pursuing the sabotage complaint, and that the sabotage was actually the least serious thing Melissa had done. HR moved fast, like impressively fast. Melissa was called into a meeting that afternoon. I wasn't there, but I heard later she'd initially tried to deny everything. Said the Etsy shop was hers, but the designs were all original work she'd created on her own time. That lasted until they showed her the side-by-side comparisons, the access logs, the irrefutable evidence that she'd literally copy-pasted client files and sold them. She was fired immediately. Not just fired. Walked out by security with a box of her personal items while everyone watched. The kind of firing that sends a message. But that wasn't even the worst part for her. The company's legal team decided to pursue a lawsuit. She'd violated her employment contract, her NDA, and potentially exposed the company to liability if clients found out their confidential designs had been sold online. They were going after her for damages, for all the money she'd made on Etsy, for legal fees, everything, and they contacted the clients whose designs had been stolen. Some of them decided to pursue their own legal action against Melissa. Turns out companies don't love discovering that the branding they paid thousands of dollars for has been sold to random Etsy shoppers. The original client, the one whose presentation had been sabotaged, was looped in on everything. My manager reached out to them directly, explained what had happened, and offered to have me deliver the real presentation, the complete one, the one I'd actually spent 3 months preparing. I presented the following week, used the backup files from my home USB drive. It went perfectly. The client re-engaged. Not only did they move forward with the original project, they expanded the scope because they were impressed with the thoroughness of the work. It ended up being the biggest account I'd ever landed. Melissa's career in the industry is basically over. Word spreads fast in our field. Everyone knows what she did. No one's going to hire someone who steals client work and sells it online. The lawsuit is ongoing, but from what I've heard, she's already had her wages garnished and had to shut down her Etsy shop. All those 5-star reviews, gone. All that side income, gone. Her reputation, completely destroyed. And honestly, she did it to herself. If she'd just done her job, if she'd worked on her own presentations instead of sabotaging mine and stealing client work, none of this would have happened. But she got greedy, got arrogant, thought she could delete my files and present inferior work, and no one would dig deeper. Thought she could steal proprietary designs and sell them indefinitely without getting caught. She was wrong on both counts. Karma works best when you have receipts, and I had 3 months' worth of documentation, access logs, screenshots, and evidence of fraud. All I had to do was hand it over and let the system do what it was designed to do. People ask me if I feel bad about getting her fired, about the lawsuit, about destroying her career. I don't, not even slightly. She sabotaged my work, tried to ruin my reputation, and was actively stealing from the company and our clients. That's not a mistake. That's not a lapse in judgment. That's a pattern of deliberate, unethical behavior. And the consequences she's facing? Those are the natural result of her own choices. I got the promotion I'd been working toward. The client account is thriving. My reputation at the company is solid. And Melissa? Well, she's dealing with lawyers and debt, and an industry that knows exactly what she did. Stealing work is one thing, but when your boss uses lies to destroy your reputation, the stakes get even higher. My boss Greg was one of those managers who looked perfect on paper. Great at presentations, always had the right buzzwords in meetings, knew exactly how to charm the executives. But behind closed doors, he was a nightmare. He'd give you contradictory instructions, then blame you when things went wrong. He'd take credit for your work and throw you under the bus for his mistakes. Classic corporate sociopath. I'd been dealing with his garbage for 2 years, keeping my head down, documenting everything just in case. Turns out that paranoia saved my career. The situation started with a major client account. We were pitching a software implementation that would have brought in about 2 million in revenue. Greg was the lead, I was doing most of the actual work. About 3 weeks before the final presentation, Greg pulled me into his office and told me to change some numbers in our cost analysis, make the timeline shorter, reduce the resource allocation, basically promise things we couldn't deliver. I told him that violated our standard protocols. We had policies specifically against overpromising to clients. He said he didn't care, that this was how you close big deals, and that I needed to be a team player. He literally said if I wanted to advance in this company, I needed to learn when to bend the rules. So I did what he asked. I documented his instructions in a follow-up email, changed the numbers, and submitted the revised proposal. Greg approved it without changes. We presented to the client. They loved it, signed the contract on the spot. 2 months later, the project was falling apart. We couldn't meet the timeline Greg had promised. We didn't have the resources. The client was furious, threatening to sue for breach of contract. And suddenly, Greg called an emergency meeting with HR. He told them I'd ignored company protocols, that I'd submitted false information to the client without his knowledge, and that my incompetence had jeopardized a major account. He showed them the proposal with my name on it as the primary author, said he'd trusted me to handle the details and I'd gone rogue. HR called me in the next day. I was looking at termination, possibly legal action if the client sued. My career was about to be destroyed because Greg needed a scapegoat for his own decisions. But here's the thing, I had emails, I had Slack messages, I had the original proposal with accurate numbers and Greg's comments telling me to change them. I had everything. I didn't show HR right away though, because I found out something interesting. Greg was up for promotion, vice president of sales, big title, big raise, corner office. There was going to be an announcement at our annual company conference in 2 weeks. Whole ceremony planned, speech prepared, the works. And I realized I had a choice. I could clear my name quietly through HR, probably save my job, and Greg would still get his promotion. Or I could wait. Let him think he'd won. Let him have his moment, and then burn it all down in front of everyone. I chose option 2. I spent those 2 weeks gathering everything I could. Not just about this incident, but about every shady thing Greg had ever done. I reached out to former co-workers he'd screwed over, found 3 other people he'd blamed for his mistakes, got them to send me documentation. One guy had actually quit because Greg had destroyed his reputation over a project that Greg himself had mismanaged. I compiled emails showing Greg manipulating reports to make his numbers look better, messages where he'd explicitly told people to violate company policy, client communications where he'd made promises he knew we couldn't keep, a whole pattern of behavior spanning 5 years. I put it all into a presentation. Professional, organized, damning. The company conference was at a hotel downtown. About 200 employees, all the executives, some board members. Greg's promotion announcement was scheduled for right after lunch. Big moment. He'd even brought his wife and kids to watch. He gave his speech, talked about his journey with the company, his vision for the sales department, how honored he was to step into this new role. People were clapping. The CEO was smiling, about to hand him some crystal award thing. That's when I stood up. Asked if I could say a few words. Everyone looked confused, but the CEO nodded, probably thinking I was going to congratulate Greg or something. I walked up to the front, plugged my laptop into the projector, and I started talking. I thanked Greg for his leadership, said I'd learned so much from him about how to navigate corporate politics, Then I said I wanted to share some specific examples of his management style with everyone. And here's where it gets absurd. I put up the first email. Greg's message telling me to falsify the client proposal. His exact words on the screen for everyone to see. The room got very quiet. Greg's face went white. He stood up, started to say something, but I kept going. Next slide. Messages to another employee telling them to backdate documents. Next slide. An email chain where he'd taken credit for a junior employee's idea and presented it as his own to the executives. Next slide. Client communications where he'd lied about our capabilities. I went through 12 slides, each one worse than the last. Evidence of fraud, manipulation, policy violations, ethical breaches, all with Greg's name attached, all irrefutable. The CEO stopped smiling around slide 3. By slide 7, he'd stood up and was reading the screen with this expression, like he was watching his stock portfolio crash in real time. The HR director had her phone out, taking photos of the evidence. When I finished, I unplugged my laptop and said one more thing. I said that I was facing termination for following Greg's orders, and I thought everyone should know the full context before any final decisions were made about anyone's employment status. Then I sat down. The room was dead silent. Greg tried to speak, stammered something about context and misunderstandings, but the CEO cut him off, told him they'd discuss this in private. Greg was escorted out of the conference room by security. His wife and kids followed, looking confused and humiliated. The ceremony didn't continue. Everyone just kind of dispersed, whispering. I went back to my hotel room and waited for the fallout. It came fast. HR called me that evening, asked me to come to an emergency meeting the next morning. I brought printed copies of everything I'd shown, plus additional documentation I hadn't had time to present. They investigated for 3 days, interviewed everyone I'd mentioned, verified every email and message, and then they fired Greg. Not just denied the promotion, fired him entirely, for cause, which meant no severance package, no references, nothing. The client lawsuit was settled quietly. Company ate the cost, apologized, promised better oversight. The executives were embarrassed, but they couldn't exactly dispute the evidence. And me? 2 weeks later, they offered me Greg's old position. Manager of Client Services, not VP, but a significant promotion from where I'd been, with a raise and a formal apology from the CEO about how I'd been treated. Some people in the office thought I'd gone too far, that I'd humiliated Greg publicly when I could have handled it through proper channels. But proper channels were about to fire me based on Greg's lies. HR had already made up their minds. If I'd just shown them the evidence privately, maybe I'd have kept my job, but Greg would have moved up and continued destroying people's careers from a position of even more power. This way, everyone knew. Everyone saw exactly who he was. There was no ambiguity, no room for him to spin it later. His reputation was finished. His career in this industry probably finished. No company's going to hire a VP who got exposed for fraud at a public ceremony. People ask me if I feel bad about the timing, about doing it in front of his family. Honestly, a little. His kids didn't deserve that. But Greg made the choice to build his career on lies. He chose to scapegoat people to cover his mistakes. He chose to put me in a position where I was fighting for my professional life. I just chose the moment that would have maximum impact. When he thought he'd won, when he was standing in front of everyone, accepting an award for being exactly the kind of leader this company valued. Sometimes you have to fight dirty when someone's trying to bury you, and sometimes the best revenge is just showing people the truth at exactly the right moment. Bosses who lie can be dealt with, but what happens when you're framed for something criminal and the entire office turns against you? Expensive equipment started disappearing from our office about 3 months ago. First, it was small stuff. A tablet here, some headphones there, things people might have just misplaced. Then a high-end camera went missing from the supply room. Then 2 company laptops. Suddenly management was taking it seriously, sending out emails about office security and reminding everyone that theft was grounds for immediate termination. I work in marketing at a mid-sized tech company. We have a lot of expensive equipment floating around for photo shoots and video production. The missing items totaled probably $15,000 worth of gear. HR started interviewing people, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious. I told them the truth. I had no idea who was taking stuff. 2 weeks later, my manager called me into her office. She had this weird expression on her face, somewhere between disappointed and uncomfortable. She asked me to explain why a company laptop, one of the missing ones, was found in my desk drawer during a routine inspection. I just stared at her, told her that was impossible. I didn't take any laptop. I didn't even have access to the drawer where they kept the equipment lockups. She pulled out photos, clear images of a company laptop sitting in my bottom desk drawer, serial number matching one of the stolen devices. Someone had planted it there. Had to be. But who? And why me? My manager said, given the evidence, they had no choice but to suspend me pending a full investigation. She actually seemed sympathetic, said she hoped there was an explanation, but until they figured this out, I needed to leave the premises. Security walked me out that afternoon. I had to hand over my badge, my keys, everything. Co-workers stared as I left. Some looked confused. Others looked like they'd already decided I was guilty. The humiliation was crushing. I'd worked at this company for 4 years, never had a single complaint, never even called in sick unless I absolutely had to. And now I was being escorted out like a criminal because someone had framed me. I spent the next 2 days trying to figure out who would do this, who had access to my desk, who knew where the equipment was stored, who had a reason to set me up. The list wasn't long, maybe 6 or 7 people who could have pulled it off. But I kept coming back to one name: Brad. Brad worked in the same department, had been there about 2 years. We weren't friends exactly, but we were friendly. Grabbed lunch sometimes, collaborated on projects. But lately he'd been weird, distant, asked me strange questions about my schedule. When I usually left for the day, whether I locked my desk, I'd thought he was just making conversation. Now those questions felt different. I needed proof. The company was conducting their investigation, but I had zero faith they'd find the real culprit. They'd found stolen property in my desk. As far as they were concerned, case closed. If I wanted to clear my name, I had to do it myself. So I did something technically against company policy. I went back to the office after hours. I still had my personal key card from before they deactivated my work badge. The building security was minimal at night, just a sign-in sheet at the front desk that no one really monitored. I signed in under a fake name, took the elevator up, and spent 3 hours installing tiny wireless cameras in strategic locations. One pointed at the equipment storage room, one at my desk, one at Brad's workspace. The cameras were cheap things I'd ordered online, motion activated, uploaded footage to a cloud account. If someone was sneaking around after hours, I'd have proof. Then came the breaking point. 2 nights later, I got a motion alert on my phone at 2 in the morning. Someone was in the office. I opened the camera feed on my laptop and watched Brad let himself into the building using his own keycard. He went straight to the equipment room, unlocked it with what looked like a copied key, and took out 2 tablets and a portable hard drive. Then he walked over to another coworker's desk, Emily's, and planted one of the tablets in her drawer. I watched him do it in real time, watched him carefully place the tablet, arrange some papers over it to make it look hidden but findable, then lock her drawer with what I assumed was another copied key. He was systematically framing people. I was just the first. He left the building 20 minutes later, carrying the other stolen items in his backpack. I had it all on video. Clear footage of him stealing, of him planting evidence, time-stamped and saved to the cloud. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I made copies of everything, organized the footage with timestamps and notes, then prepared a full report. First thing the next morning, I called the police, filed an official report, showed them the videos. The detective I spoke with was initially skeptical about how I'd obtained the footage, but when he saw what was on it, his tone changed. This wasn't just office theft anymore. This was a pattern of criminal behavior. I also sent everything to HR and my manager. Within 2 hours, I got a call asking me to come in for a meeting. They'd reviewed the footage. They were appalled. Brad was being terminated immediately and banned from the premises. The police were on their way to arrest him, but that wasn't even the worst part. When the police searched Brad's apartment, they found over $30,000 worth of company property. He'd been stealing for almost a year, systematically taking high-value items and selling them online through various accounts. When people started noticing, when management started investigating, he'd panicked. He needed a scapegoat, so he started planting evidence on co-workers, hoping to redirect suspicion and buy himself more time. I was just unlucky enough to be first on his list. If my cameras hadn't caught him, Emily would have been next, then probably someone else. He'd planned to keep framing people until the investigation fizzled out, or until we'd taken enough equipment to disappear completely. Brad was arrested at his apartment that afternoon, charged with theft, fraud, breaking and entering, evidence tampering, a whole list of things I didn't fully understand. His lawyer tried to argue the camera footage was inadmissible since I'd installed them without permission, but the detective said once they had reason to investigate, they'd obtained proper warrants and found enough physical evidence that my videos were just supplementary. The company reinstated me with an official apology, gave me back pay for the 2 weeks I'd been suspended, plus a bonus for helping uncover the theft ring. My manager apologized personally, said she should have trusted me, should have looked deeper before suspending me. I appreciated the sentiment, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen me escorted out. Everyone had suspected me. That doesn't just go away because you're eventually proven innocent. They also upgraded their security. Proper cameras in all the equipment rooms, better locks, a real inventory tracking system. Changes that probably should have been implemented years ago, but took a major theft scandal to actually happen. Brad's trial is still pending. His lawyer's trying to negotiate a plea deal, but from what I heard, he's looking at serious jail time. Turns out this wasn't his first offense. He'd been fired from 2 previous jobs for similar issues, but had managed to keep it off his record through settlements. This time there was too much evidence, too many victims, too public a case. Some co-workers apologize for doubting me. Others still seem uncomfortable around me, like they're not sure how to act. Emily thanked me directly, said if I hadn't caught him, she would have been next, and she might not have been able to prove her innocence. We've gotten closer since all this happened. Trauma bonding, I guess. People ask if I regret installing the cameras, since technically I violated company policy. Honestly, no. I was facing termination and possible criminal charges for something I didn't do. Breaking a minor rule about unauthorized surveillance seemed like a reasonable trade-off for clearing my name and catching an actual criminal. The company agreed, evidently, since they never disciplined me for it. The whole experience changed how I see workplace dynamics, how quickly people are willing to believe the worst, how easy it is to manipulate evidence and perception, how vulnerable you are when someone decides to target you. I'm more cautious now. I lock everything. I document everything. I trust people less automatically. But I also learned that sometimes you have to take risks to protect yourself, that waiting for the system to work isn't always enough, that sometimes breaking small rules is worth it to expose big crimes. Would I do it again? Absolutely. In a heartbeat. Being framed at work is nightmare fuel, but when your manager's corruption runs even deeper, exposing them becomes your only option. I used to think hard work spoke for itself, that if you hit your targets, delivered quality results, and showed up consistently, people would notice, that your reputation would build naturally based on merit. My manager Paul taught me how wrong I was about all of that. I'd been with the company for 3 years, working in accounts management. The job was straightforward: manage client relationships, oversee billing, make sure payments processed correctly. I was good at it. My clients liked me. My numbers were solid. Then Paul became my direct manager after a restructuring, and everything changed. At first, it was subtle. He'd make little comments in meetings about me needing to step up my game. He'd CC upper management on emails pointing out minor mistakes, things that could have been handled privately. He started assigning me to the most difficult clients, the ones with complicated billing structures and constant complaints, then would act surprised when those accounts took up most of my time. My coworkers started treating me differently. Conversations would stop when I walked into the break room. People stopped inviting me to team lunches. I'd overhear whispers about how I wasn't pulling my weight, how Paul was frustrated with my performance. None of it made sense because my actual work results hadn't changed. I was still hitting every target, still maintaining my client relationships. But somehow my reputation was tanking. My performance review that year was devastating. Paul rated me below expectations across the board, said I lacked attention to detail, struggled with time management, wasn't a team player. He had specific examples that sounded damning on paper, but were completely taken out of context. An email I'd sent asking for clarification on a policy became evidence I didn't understand basic procedures. A client complaint that I'd resolved within 24 hours became proof I couldn't handle difficult situations. I tried to defend myself, but Paul had built this narrative so thoroughly that arguing against it made me look defensive and unable to accept criticism. HR sat in on the meeting, nodding along with everything he said. I left that review feeling completely blindsided and questioning whether I was actually terrible at my job and just hadn't realized it. Then I found the discrepancies. I'd been putting together a quarterly report for one of my clients, cross-referencing their payments against our invoices. The numbers didn't match, small differences, just a few $100s here and there, but consistent. I flagged it to Paul, thinking it was a billing error we needed to correct. He told me to drop it. Said the client probably had their own accounting issues and it wasn't our problem, but something about his reaction felt off. He was too quick to dismiss it, too insistent that I not dig deeper. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I dug deeper anyway. I started going through other client accounts during my lunch breaks, found the same pattern, small amounts missing from payments, amounts that wouldn't be immediately noticeable but added up over time. I pulled invoices from our system and compared them to the copies clients had on file. They didn't match. Someone had been altering invoices after sending them to clients, increasing the amount slightly, then pocketing the difference. And here's where it gets absurd. The altered invoices all went through Paul's approval. The mysterious wire transfers all required his authorization. The fake vendor accounts that payments were being routed through were all set up with his credentials. Paul had been embezzling client funds for years, systematically stealing small amounts from dozens of accounts, carefully covering his tracks, and I'd accidentally stumbled onto his scheme by doing my job properly. Suddenly, his campaign to destroy my credibility made perfect sense. He'd been preemptively discrediting me so that if I noticed anything suspicious and reported it, no one would believe me. I was the incompetent, lazy employee who couldn't be trusted. Who would take my accusations seriously? I felt sick. This wasn't about my performance. This had never been about my performance. Paul had been systematically destroying my reputation to protect himself from getting caught stealing. I didn't confront him. I wasn't that stupid. Instead, I started documenting everything. I made copies of every altered invoice, every suspicious wire transfer, every fake vendor account. I tracked the pattern of thefts going back 3 years, built spreadsheets showing exactly how much had been stolen from each client, where the money had gone, how Paul had covered it up. I worked on this for weeks, staying late after everyone left, coming in early before Paul arrived. I was terrified he'd notice what I was doing, but he was so confident in having destroyed my credibility that he didn't seem to think I was a threat. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I dug deeper, I realized Paul wasn't working alone. Our CFO had been approving some of these transfers, had been signing off on vendor payments to companies that didn't exist. The embezzlement went higher than just my manager. This was a company-wide cover-up. I consulted a lawyer, showed them everything I'd found. They advised me to take it to the board of directors and to file a report with the SEC. Said what Paul and the CFO were doing was serious fraud, that the company could face massive legal consequences, but that I needed to be protected as a whistleblower. I sent the comprehensive report to the board on a Friday afternoon. Hundreds of pages of documentation, spreadsheets, invoice comparisons, bank records I'd managed to access through our client portal. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered over 2 months of secret investigating. Then I waited. The weekend felt like the longest of my life. I kept expecting Paul to call, to somehow know what I'd done, to retaliate. But nothing happened. Monday morning I came into work and Paul was gone. His office was empty. Security was doing bag checks at the entrance. The CFO was also missing. By noon, there were men in suits going through filing cabinets and seizing computers. A company-wide email went out saying there was an ongoing investigation and we should direct all questions to HR. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, I was placed on paid administrative leave, which basically meant I sat at home while lawyers and forensic accountants tore through our company's records. They found everything I'd found and more. Turns out Paul had been embezzling for over 5 years, had stolen close to $2 million. The CFO had taken even more. Paul was arrested. So was the CFO. They both faced federal fraud charges. The company faced massive fines from the SEC and had to reimburse every client who'd been stolen from. Our stock price tanked. Several board members resigned. It was a complete organizational meltdown. I was eventually cleared and offered my job back with a promotion and a raise. The company's way of apologizing and probably trying to avoid me suing them. But I didn't want it. I'd watched this company destroy my reputation to protect thieves. I'd seen how quickly co-workers I'd worked with for years had turned on me based on one manager's lies. I didn't want to rebuild my career somewhere that had treated me like that. I took a job with a competitor. Better pay, better title, better culture. Used the whole mess as proof that I was someone who valued integrity, even when it cost me. My new employer saw the news coverage, knew I was the whistleblower, and respected that I'd done the right thing even when it was hard. Paul's trial happened about a year later. He pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence, but still got 8 years in federal prison. The CFO got 12. The company never fully recovered. They lost major clients, faced ongoing lawsuits, eventually got acquired by a larger firm for a fraction of what they'd been worth. People sometimes ask if I regret blowing the whistle, if I wish I'd just kept my head down and found a new job quietly. And honestly, no. Paul spent years making me question my own competence, turning my co-workers against me, trying to destroy my career to cover up his crimes. He thought he'd successfully discredited me enough that no one would listen if I spoke up. He was wrong. The truth didn't need my reputation to be intact. It just needed documentation, and I had plenty of that. The best revenge, really, is just telling the truth sometimes, especially when the truth involves federal fraud charges and prison time. Paul built his empire on lies and theft, and I got to watch it crumble from the safety of a better job with a better company. That felt like justice. Corporate corruption is one beast, but personal betrayal from a best friend who weaponizes social media against you, that's pure evil. Jenna and I had been best friends since high school. 10 years of friendship. We'd been through everything together, or at least I thought we had. Turns out you can know someone for a decade and still have no idea who they really are. It started on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to my phone exploding with notifications, messages from people I barely knew, comments on old Instagram posts, DMs calling me horrible names. I had no idea what was happening. Then I saw Jenna's post. She'd uploaded screenshots of text messages, messages that supposedly came from me. Cruel, vicious things about her weight, about her family, about her relationship, calling her worthless, telling her she'd never amount to anything, mocking her insecurities in the most personal, cutting way possible. The kind of messages that would end a friendship instantly if they were real. Except I'd never sent them, never typed a single one of those words. I scrolled through the screenshots in disbelief. They looked real. They had my profile picture, my phone number, the right text bubble colors, but I knew with absolute certainty I'd never written any of it.